Hey there, tonight we're exploring how Americans stayed warm before central heating. And what you're about to discover is that roaring fires and layered clothing were more than just cozy. They were survival essentials in a world without thermostats. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the cruel winds howled through the early American settlements, those brave souls weren't exactly cozying up with a hot cocoa by the fireplace. The truth is, staying warm in the 17th and 18th centuries was a full-time job, one that required creativity, sweat, and a tolerance for smoke that would put a modern barbecue pitmaster to shame. Forget central heating. These folks were dealing with the kind of cold that made you question your life choices every time you woke up with frost on your eyelashes. Now, the iconic image of the colonial fireplace is as much a part of American folklore as apple pie and Paul Revere. But let's not get too romantic. That hearth was more like a medieval furnace than a quaint domestic gathering place. Imagine a gaping maw of bricks, often large enough to roast an entire ox. These fireplaces were the centerpiece of colonial homes, not just for warmth, but also for cooking and light. And when I say centerpiece, I mean literally. Some of these bad boys were big enough to house a small family gathering inside. But here's the kicker. They sucked up wood like a teenage boy devours pizza. A single colonial household might burn through 20 to 40 cords of wood in a single winter. That's about 80 to 160 trees, or roughly a small forest for those keeping track. So, while the thought of a crackling fire might evoke images of cozy nights, the reality was a bit more labor-intensive. Chopping wood was a year-round chore. And let's talk about the smoke. Today's hipsters might pay extra for that smoked flavor, but back then, it came gratis with every breath you took. Fireplaces were notoriously inefficient, often sending more heat up the chimney than into the room. If you were lucky, you might have a fireback, a cast-iron plate at the back of the fireplace, to reflect some heat back into the room. But even then, most of the warmth hovered near the fire itself. Step away, and you'd be feeling the chill faster than you can say, pass the firewood. Enter the Franklin stove, the 18th century brainchild of one Benjamin Franklin. Yep, the same guy who flew a kite in a thunderstorm and allegedly coined the phrase, "A penny saved is a penny earned." Franklin's stove was a cast-iron contraption designed to address the inefficiencies of the traditional fireplace. It was a sort of proto-space heater, with a clever design that allowed it to radiate more heat into the room while using less wood. The stove was freestanding, closed on all sides, except for a small opening at the front, and had an intricate system of baffles to direct the flow of hot air. It was quite the technological marvel for its time, but before you get too misty-eyed about the ingenuity of it all, let's talk practicality. The Franklin stove, while innovative, was not an instant hit. For one, it wasn't cheap. Prices varied, but it could cost upwards of £5 sterling, a hefty sum when you consider that the average laborer might earn about 1 shilling a day. And here's the kicker. Franklin himself never patented his invention, believing in the free sharing of knowledge. Admirable, sure, but it also meant that the design was often copied and modified, sometimes poorly, by other blacksmiths. In short, not all Franklin stoves were created equal, and many a colonial family found themselves fiddling with drafts and dampers to coax any semblance of warmth. And then there's the urban legend that Franklin's stove was a dud. It's a bit of a historical exaggeration. Sure, the stove didn't become ubiquitous overnight, but it paved the way for more efficient heating methods down the road. It's like the grandfather of the modern radiator, definitely not perfect, but an important step in the evolution of indoor heating. In between chopping wood and dodging smoke, early Americans had a few other tricks up their woolen sleeves. Heavy draperies, thick woolen clothing, and even sleeping caps were part of the colonial winter wardrobe. And speaking of sleep, can we give a shout-out to the bed warmer? Picture a long-handled pan filled with hot coals, used to preheat the sheets before you climbed under them. It was the colonial equivalent of an electric blanket, minus the electricity. Of course, it came with its own risks, namely, setting the bed on fire. But hey, what's a little danger when your toes are turning blue? So next time you're enjoying the comforting hum of a central heating system, spare a thought for our colonial forebears. They might not have had thermostats or double glazing, but they had grit, determination, and a healthy appreciation for the value of a well-stoked fire. And remember, the next time you hear someone wax poetic about the good old days, you can smile knowingly, thinking of the soot-stained realities behind those flickering hearthside tales. Now, as we move into the 19th century, it's time to ditch those wood-champing fireplaces and step into the industrial age, where coal was king and homeowners were more gadget-happy than a kid in a toy store. Yep, the Victorian era wasn't just about stiff collars and elaborate facial hair. It was a time of serious innovation, especially in heating homes. The coal stove, that blackened beacon of progress, was a game-changer. It made wood stoves look like relics of the past, much like how today's smartphones make flip phones seem like ancient artifacts. Coal was the hot new thing, literally and figuratively. By the mid-1800s, anthracite coal was being mined in Pennsylvania and shipped across the Northeast like it was the latest must-have accessory. And why not? It burned harder and longer than wood, and thanks to railroads, it was more accessible than ever. The economic shift was palpable. Coal was cheaper by volume, and the burgeoning industrial cities needed cheap heating solutions. The coal stove was to the 19th century what the iPhone is to millennials, a status symbol and a practical necessity rolled into one. These stoves were marvels of Victorian engineering. Picture cast iron beasts with ornate designs, looking as if they might double as a steampunk art piece in a modern hipster's apartment. They were efficient, too, with enclosed compartments that trapped heat like a miser hoarding gold coins. And let's not forget the chimney flues, twisting and turning like a roller coaster, ensuring every bit of heat lingered in the room before reluctantly escaping outside. Of course, nothing's perfect. Coal stoves had their downsides. For one, coal dust was the glitter of the 1800. It got everywhere and lingered long after the party was over, and the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning was very real. But hey, what's a little danger when you're toasty warm? Besides, the Victorians had a knack for inventing gadgets, and they weren't above adding a few more bells and whistles to their stoves to make them safer and more efficient. The Victorian era was also about innovation in water heating. Enter the hot water heating systems, which were like the Tesla of the time, futuristic, and a bit of a luxury. These early systems used coal-fired boilers to heat water that was then circulated through a network of pipes. It was central heating, just not as we know it today. But even if the average Joe couldn't afford these setups, they laid the groundwork for modern systems. And let's talk about the economic context here. Industrialization was in full swing, and cities were growing faster than a teenager on a sugar rush. With more people cramming into urban areas, the demand for efficient heating solutions skyrocketed. The coal industry boomed, and with it, so did the innovation in heating technology. It was a classic case of supply meeting demand in a dance as old as capitalism itself. This obsession with gadgets wasn't just a quirk of the wealthy. It was a reflection of a society in the throes of change, where technology was seen as the answer to everything from heating your home to cooking your dinner. Victorians loved their gadgets, and if they couldn't have the latest, they'd invent it themselves. It was the era of do-it-yourself ingenuity, with a side of industrial chic. But let's not get too romantic. The reality was that these innovations were often out of reach for the average working-class family. While the middle and upper classes were busy marveling at their coal stoves and hot water systems, many others were still shivering in poorly insulated homes. It's a tale as old as time. Technological advances often come with a hefty price tag, leaving some folks out in the cold, quite literally. Of course, the Victorians weren't just about practical inventions. They had a flair for the dramatic, and their homes often reflected that. Ornate fireplaces, towering coal stoves with intricate designs, and rooms filled with heavy drapes and plush furnishings to trap heat. They turned necessity into an art form, making the mundane task of staying warm look like an elaborate performance. In the grand tapestry of history, the 19th century was a period of transition, a bridge between the raw, elemental struggle against nature and the modern conveniences we take for granted today. It was a time when heating your home was no longer just about survival, but also about status, comfort, and even aesthetics. And while we've come a long way from the coal dust-covered days of yore, the legacy of Victorian innovation lives on every time we turn up the thermostat and bask in the warmth of our centrally heated homes. So next time you're cranking up your radiator, remember those Victorian gadget enthusiasts who paved the way with their coal stoves and water heating systems. They might not have had Wi-Fi or smart thermostats, but they had ingenuity, determination, and a flair for the dramatic that makes our modern conveniences seem a little less magical and a whole lot more possible. As we stroll out of the Victorian era, where coal stoves reigned supreme like the smartphones of their time, we find ourselves stepping into the bustling streets of rapidly growing cities. Urbanization was the new big thing, and with it came challenges that would make even the most seasoned city planner break into a cold sweat, or maybe a hot one, given the context of our story. The rise of tenements wasn't just a tale of cramped living quarters and questionable sanitary conditions. It was also a game changer for how people kept warm, or at least tried to. Picture this: New York City in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The skyline wasn't defined by towering skyscrapers, but rather by a sea of tenements, each crammed with as many people as a can of sardines. This was the era when the American dream collided head-on with the realities of urban living. Immigrants and rural migrants flooded into the cities, drawn by the promise of jobs and a better life, only to find themselves squeezed into tiny apartments with paper-thin walls. Heating these spaces wasn't just a convenience, it was a necessity for survival. Enter the world of steam heating, the precursor to the modern radiator. If you think communal heating sounds like a warm and fuzzy concept, think again. The idea was simple enough. A central boiler would heat water, which would then circulate as steam through a network of pipes into individual apartments. Simple, right? Not so much. These systems often had a mind of their own, providing too much heat to some and barely any to others. It was like the Goldilocks of heating systems, with tenants often left in a perpetual search for just right that never quite materialized. The economics of this system were as intricate as a Victorian lace doily. Tenement landlords, always keen to cut costs, would often skimp on maintenance, resulting in radiators that were as reliable as a politician's promise. And let's not forget the ever-present risk of leaks, which could turn a cozy apartment into a sauna at the drop of a hat, or a drip of a pipe. It was a delicate balance of economics, engineering, and sheer luck. But before you wax nostalgic about the charm of steam heating, remember that these early systems were far from perfect. Radiators hissed and clanked like an obstinate old man refusing to get out of bed. They could be temperamental, prone to either blasting apartments with heat akin to the Sahara or leaving them as chilly as a polar bear's picnic. And then there was the small matter of safety. These gargantuan metal beasts could get scalding hot, turning an accidental brush against one into an impromptu branding session. Yet, despite the drawbacks, steam heating was a revolution for urban dwellers. It was a great equalizer, offering a semblance of warmth to the masses huddled in their tiny apartments. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but it was a significant step up from the smoky, inefficient fireplaces of yore. It was part of a broader societal shift, where technology was beginning to make city living not just possible, but bearable. Now, let's talk about the economic context, because you know I love a good economic subplot. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a time of rapid industrialization and urban growth. Cities were expanding faster than a viral TikTok dance, and the demand for affordable housing was through the roof, literally. Tenements sprang up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, and with them, the need for an efficient heating solution. Steam heating wasn't just about comfort, it was about practicality and survival in the concrete jungles. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, or rather, the radiator in the apartment. Despite their ubiquity, radiators weren't universally loved. They were noisy, bulky, and often temperamental. Yet, for many, they were a symbol of progress, a sign that life in the city was improving, albeit slowly, and with plenty of hiccups along the way. Social changes were also afoot, as urbanization brought together people from all walks of life. The melting pot of the city was simmering nicely, and steam heating was a part of that stew. It was a shared experience, a common thread that tied together the disparate lives of city dwellers. Whether you lived in a swanky Upper East Side brownstone or a crowded Lower East Side tenement. Chances were you relied on steam heating to get through those brutal winter months. Now, let's talk about the birth of radiator systems. The cast-iron radiator, as we know it, began to take shape in the late 19th century, thanks to the ingenuity of inventors like Joseph Nasson and Robert Briggs. These two were the Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak of their time, pioneering a system that would become the backbone of urban heating. Their design was simple yet effective, using the principle of convection to circulate heat throughout a room. It was a marvel of engineering, combining practicality with a touch of industrial chic that would make any modern hipster swoon. But before you start thinking of radiators as the unsung heroes of urban heating, remember that they were often more of a necessary evil than a beloved fixture. Tenants cursed them for their quirks, landlords fretted over their upkeep, and engineers scratched their heads trying to perfect them. Yet, despite the challenges, radiators became a staple of city life, a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt and innovate in the face of adversity. So, as we wrap up this chapter of our tale, let's take a moment to appreciate the steam and radiator systems that kept our urban ancestors warm. They may not have been perfect, but they represented a significant leap forward in the evolution of indoor heating. They were a symbol of the ingenuity and determination that defined an era, a reminder that even in the face of rapid change and urban chaos, humans have always found a way to adapt, to survive, and to thrive. And with that, let's keep the momentum going as we move into the next part of our story, where the thermostat takes center stage and the cozy comforts of modern heating systems become a reality. But for now, let's tip our hats to the tenement dwellers and city slickers who braved the quirks of steam heat and paved the way for the cozy comforts we enjoy today. As the thermostat takes its long-awaited bow on the historical stage, let's not forget the clunky, sometimes hilarious journey to get here. The early 20th century was a time when heating technology was about to get a major glow-up. We're talking about a period when central heating was more than just a pipe dream. It was slowly becoming the reality for many households. And like any good story, it came with its fair share of twists, turns, and economic woes. Let's kick things off with a game-changer, the introduction of forced-air heating systems. This was the era when air started doing more legwork than just being something you breathe. The concept was simple yet revolutionary. Instead of relying on convection currents or clunky steam systems, forced-air systems used a central furnace to heat air, which was then blown through ducts to different rooms. It was the heating equivalent of a light bulb moment, literally lighting up homes with warmth more efficiently. This innovation was like trading in your horse-drawn carriage for a shiny new automobile, and it would gradually become as ubiquitous as apple pie. But let's not get carried away by this rosy picture. While the allure of evenly heated rooms was tantalizing, the road to central heating was paved with economic potholes. Enter the Great Depression, stage left. The 1930s were a time when the American economy was in a nosedive, and people were tightening their belts harder than a corset at a Victorian ball. Investing in a new heating system was a luxury few could afford, and many households clung to their trusty, albeit temperamental, radiators like an old security blanket. Now, let's talk fuel. Coal had been the reigning heavyweight champ of heating fuels, but by the early 20th century, its days were numbered. Enter natural gas, the underdog contender that would eventually take the crown. Natural gas was cleaner, more efficient, and didn't turn your home into a sooty dungeon. It was like the difference between using dial-up and broadband. Once you switched, there was no going back. By the 1930s, natural gas pipelines were sprawling across the U.S., like a game of subterranean twister, and the stage was set for it to become the nation's heating darling. Of course, the transition wasn't without its hiccups. There was a learning curve, and early gas heating systems could be as temperamental as a cat on a leash. Leaks were a concern, and safety standards were still catching up to the technology. There were growing pains, but the promise of a cleaner, more efficient fuel source was too good to pass up. And let's be real, anything that meant less coal dust in the living room was a win in most people's books. The shift towards natural gas wasn't just about convenience. It was a reflection of broader economic and social changes. The Great Depression had taught America a thing or two about resourcefulness and efficiency. People were looking for ways to stretch every dollar, and natural gas offered a more economical heating solution. Plus, as urban areas continue to swell with people chasing the ever-elusive American dream, the demand for efficient, reliable heating systems grew faster than a teenager's appetite. Let's not forget the role of innovation in this heating revolution. The 20th century was a hotbed of technological breakthroughs. Engineers and inventors were like kids in a candy store, tinkering with designs and dreaming up new ways to improve heating systems. From the introduction of thermostats, those magical little devices that let you control your home's temperature with a mere twist of a dial, to the development of more efficient furnace designs, the era was a testament to human ingenuity. It was like watching the Industrial Revolution 2.0 unfold with a focus on comfort and efficiency. Speaking of thermostats, these little gadgets deserve their own moment in the spotlight. They were the unsung heroes of modern heating, allowing people to control the temperature of their homes with a precision that would have been the envy of any Victorian gadget enthusiast. Gone were the days of fiddling with dampers and relying on the whims of steam heat. With a thermostat, you could set your home's temperature to your liking and forget about it. It was the dawn of a new era where comfort was just a dial twist away. Of course, this technological leap wasn't just about comfort. It was also about efficiency. Early thermostats were mechanical wonders, using bimetallic strips that expanded and contracted with temperature changes. It was a simple yet ingenious design that made home heating systems more efficient and user-friendly. And as electricity became more widespread, thermostats evolved into even more sophisticated devices, incorporating electronic components and programmable settings. But let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing. The transition to modern heating systems was like trying to steer a ship through choppy waters. There were technical challenges, economic hurdles, and the ever-present issue of cost. Many families, especially those hit hardest by the Depression, found themselves in a bind, forced to weigh the benefits of new heating systems against their often meager budgets. It was a classic case of progress colliding with practicality. And yet, despite the challenges, the move towards central heating systems gained momentum. The allure of a warm, evenly heated home was hard to resist, and as the economy began to recover in the late 1930s, more and more households made the switch. It was a slow but steady revolution, one that would transform the way Americans experienced winter. As we wrap up this chapter, poised to delve deeper into the post-war explosion of heating technology, let's pause to appreciate the resilience and innovation that defined this era. The early 20th century was a time of transformation, where the dream of a warm, comfortable home became a reality for many. It was a period of trial and error, of setbacks and successes, but above all, it was a testament to the enduring human spirit, the drive to innovate, adapt, and improve our lives, one degree at a time. So, as we bid farewell to the era of early central heating, we prepare to embrace the next chapter, where the warmth of innovation continues to glow ever brighter. And so, as the dust of the early 20th century settled and the thermostat took its rightful place as the household deity of warmth control, we find ourselves at an intriguing crossroads. Our journey through history's heated past has been one of innovation, trial, and triumph. But what does it all mean for us cozy modern folks lounging in the glow of central heating systems? Well, it's time to shake off the soot of nostalgia and take a good, hard look at how these historical heating methods are still sparking modern design and environmental debates. Let's start by acknowledging that the quest to keep warm has always been a delicate dance between comfort and consumption. Today, the romance of a roaring fireplace is alive and well in magazines and movie scenes. But the truth is, those picturesque hearths are about as eco-friendly as a gas-guzzling SUV from the 1980s. Yes, the hearth remains a symbol of homey charm, but it also belches out more carbon emissions than your average electric heater. So, while we might love the idea of sipping cocoa by the fire, let's not kid ourselves about its environmental footprint. And speaking of footprints, let's talk about coal. The backbone of the industrial age, coal stoked the fires of progress and warmed the carcass of many a Victorian heart, but it also left a trail of pollution as dark as the coal dust itself. Today, coal is the fossil fuel equivalent of that one relative who won't stop talking politics at Thanksgiving, controversial, divisive, and hard to ignore. While the world has largely turned its back on coal in favor of cleaner alternatives, its legacy lingers in our energy infrastructure and the air we breathe. Now, enter natural gas, the darling of the 20th century, with its cleaner burn and lower emissions. But even this energy source isn't without its controversies. Methane leaks, anyone. Natural gas is like that trendy new restaurant everyone raves about. It seems perfect on the surface, but dig a little deeper, and you'll find some issues that need addressing. It's a reminder that our energy choices are never as simple as black and white, or in this case, coal and gas. Let's not forget about the rise of electric heating systems, which have turned the traditional idea of home heating on its head. With the flick of a switch, you can now heat your home without the soot, smoke, and inevitable fire hazards of yesteryear. It's a game changer, to be sure, but like all things, it comes with its own set of complications. Electricity is as clean as its source, which means that if your power comes from coal-fired plants, you're not exactly doing Mother Earth any favors. It's a sobering thought, but one that underscores the importance of renewable energy sources as we move forward. Speaking of renewables, let's take a moment to appreciate the groundbreaking work being done in the realm of green heating solutions. From geothermal systems that tap into the Earth's natural warmth to solar panels that harness the power of the sun, we're witnessing a revolution in how we think about energy consumption. It's a far cry from the days of chopping wood in the freezing cold, and it's a reminder of just how far we've come in our quest for sustainable warmth. But even as we embrace these modern marvels, it's important to remember that the quest for cozy isn't just about technology. It's about the enduring human spirit, the drive to create comfort in the face of adversity. From the colonists huddled around their smoky hearths to the city dwellers grappling with temperamental radiators, each generation has faced its own unique challenges and risen to meet them with ingenuity and determination. And let's not forget the economic dimension. In a world where energy costs are as unpredictable as a cat on catnip, finding affordable, efficient heating solutions is more important than ever. The rising cost of living, coupled with a growing awareness of our environmental impact, has made energy efficiency a top priority for many households. It's a balancing act between keeping warm and keeping costs down, and it's a challenge that echoes the struggles of our historical counterparts. Ultimately, the legacy of historical heating methods is one of innovation and adaptation. It's a story of human resilience in the face of harsh winters and even harsher economic realities. It's a reminder that while technology may change, our fundamental need for warmth and comfort remains the same. And as we continue to innovate and explore new ways to keep cozy, let's not forget the lessons of the past. Let's embrace the spirit of ingenuity that has driven us from smoky hearths to solar panels, and let's keep the flame of innovation burning brightly as we forge ahead into the unknown. So, as you nestle into your warm, centrally heated home, spare a thought for the generations that came before. For the colonists battling the elements, the Victorians with their gadget-filled homes, and the urban dwellers navigating the quirks of steam heat. Their stories are woven into the fabric of our modern lives, a testament to the enduring human quest for comfort and warmth. In the end, keeping cozy is more than just a physical necessity. It's a reflection of our shared humanity. It's about creating spaces where we feel safe, comfortable, and connected. It's about finding warmth in the coldest of times, whether through technology, innovation, or the simple act of sharing a warm meal with loved ones. And as we continue to explore new ways to heat our homes and our hearts, let's hold on to that legacy as a guiding light, a reminder of the power of human ingenuity and the enduring quest to keep cozy, 1 degree at a time. In the highlands of what we now call Colombia, the Muisca people were busy living out a real-life episode of Gold Rush, minus the pith helmets and reality TV drama. These folks had a social structure that was as shiny as their legendary treasures. At the top of this glittering pyramid sat the Zepa and the Zac, 2 power players who could give any modern CEO a run for their money in the bling department. The Zepa ruled over the southern Muisca, mainly around what is today Bogotá, while the Zac held court to the north in Hunza, now known as Tunya. These titles might sound like characters out of a sci-fi novel, but they were very much real and wielded power with the kind of authority that made their word law. If you think your boss has too much control, Try answering to someone whose mere presence was said to be divine. Their power wasn't just about wearing the fanciest headdresses or having the most impressive gold jewelry, though they certainly had that in spades. Gold was more than just a shiny metal to the Muisca. It was a sacred conduit to the gods. The Zeeper and Zak used it to cement their divine status, with rituals that involved tossing gold offerings into the sacred Lago de Guadavita. No wonder the Spanish conquistadors thought they'd found El Dorado. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Let's put the brakes on myth for a moment and talk about the real deal. The gold that glittered in the Muisca's world wasn't just for show. It was part of a complex economic system. The Muisca were skilled traders. They didn't have a currency in the way we think of it today, but they were part of a network that swapped goods like salt, emeralds, and cotton. The gold jewelry and artifacts were a demonstration of wealth and craft, used in ceremonies to assert power and religious significance. Now, before you start picturing the Muisca as a bunch of gold-obsessed magpies, let's zoom out. This was a society where hierarchy wasn't just a word, it was a lifestyle. Below the Zeeper and Zak, there was an entire entourage of caciques, local chiefs who ran the show in smaller towns and villages. Think of them as middle management, but with more feathers and less paperwork. They handled the day-to-day governance and made sure the Zeeper and Zak's decrees were carried out. And let's not forget the Muisca Confederation, a loose alliance among various caciques that kept the whole system from descending into chaos. It was a balancing act that makes modern politics look like a walk in the park, despite the occasional skirmish. Because what's a historical society without a bit of drama? The Confederation managed to maintain a relative peace that allowed trade and culture to flourish. But let's pause and give a nod to the myths. The romanticized vision of gold-laden leaders and mystical ceremonies has its allure. It's the stuff that legends are made of, the kind of narrative that sells movie tickets and fills museum halls. Yet, it's crucial to remember that these myths often overshadow the lived reality of people who were more than just their golden reputation. The Muisca were adept at agriculture, weaving, and salt production. They lived in a world where social status was as much about responsibility and community as it was about wealth. Their leaders weren't just figureheads. They were tasked with maintaining the social order, overseeing rituals, and ensuring the well-being of their people. This isn't to say the Muisca were some utopian society. Like any civilization, they had their share of conflicts and challenges. The Zeeper and Zak had to navigate a world where political alliances could shift faster than you can say emerald trade. And while the gold was nice, it didn't make them invincible. When the Spanish arrived, the power dynamics shifted dramatically. But that's a tale for another day. For now, let's appreciate the Zeeper and Zak for what they were, charismatic, powerful leaders in a world that glittered with gold and complexity. They managed to maintain control in a society that was both deeply spiritual and undeniably practical. Their story is a reminder that history is rarely as straightforward as it seems. It's a tapestry of power, culture, and yes, a whole lot of gold. Now, let's dig into the folks who were the real MVPs of the Muisca world, the middle class. Sure, the Zeeper and Zak were the headline acts with their golden razzle-dazzle, but it was the artisans, traders, and farmers who kept the societal gears from rusting. Think of them as the unsung heroes in this saga of gold and glory. The Muisca middle class was a vibrant tapestry of skilled artisans who turned raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. These guys were the original dye-ers, crafting everything from intricate jewelry to practical pottery. Their work wasn't just art for art's sake. In a society where gold was as sacred as it was shiny, being a top-notch goldsmith was like having the Midas touch, minus the tragic Greek ending. But let's not get too starry-eyed here. These artisans weren't lounging around in luxury. Their golden wares were often destined for the elite, reinforcing the social hierarchy as much as the pyramids of Egypt did for the pharaohs. But it wasn't all about the bling. The Muisca were also accomplished textile weavers, spinning cotton and wool into garments that were as colorful as they were functional. While these might not fetch the same price as a golden amulet, they were crucial for trade and daily life. We're talking about a society that managed to look stylish while warding off the highland chill. No small feat when you're living over 500 meters above sea level. Trade was another cornerstone of the Muisca economy. Picture this. a network of barter and exchange that stretched over mountains and valleys, with traders trekking across treacherous terrain. These were the deal-makers of their day, swapping salt, emeralds, and textiles with neighboring cultures. Salt, in particular, was a hot commodity. The Muisca were masters of salt production, extracting it from the Zipaquira salt mines. They didn't just sprinkle it on their food. It was a vital trade item, often exchanged for goods as far afield as the Caribbean coast. Talk about a salty sea dog story, minus the pirates. Now, let's not forget the farmers, the bedrock of any civilization. Muisca agriculture was no walk in the park. It was more like a marathon through a maze. They cultivated a variety of crops, including maize, potatoes, and quinoa, using sophisticated techniques like terracing to make the most of their mountainous terrain. Picture these guys as early environmentalists, understanding their land intimately and working with it rather than against it. But make no mistake, farming in the highlands wasn't a pastoral idyll. It was hard work, demanding constant attention and a deep knowledge of the land. Yet life wasn't all toil and no fun. The Muisca knew how to throw a good party, with festivals and ceremonies that brought communities together. These gatherings weren't just social events. They were crucial for maintaining communal ties and reinforcing social norms. The chicha, a fermented corn drink, flowed freely, aiding in both celebration and negotiation. A good chicha-fueled festival could smooth over tensions and forge new alliances, proof that sometimes a little social lubrication can work wonders. Let's pause for a reality check. Being middle class in Muisca society wasn't exactly a stress-free existence. These folks were caught in the crossfire between the demands of the elite and the necessities of daily life. They had to juggle producing enough to feed their families while also meeting the expectations of those above them. It was a constant balancing act, like spinning plates while walking a tightrope. Add to that the pressures of trading and dealing with fickle weather patterns, and you've got a recipe for stress that's all too familiar, even 1,000 years later. And yet, the Muisca middle class was the glue that held their society together. They were the ones who ensured that gold flowed from the mines to the elite, that fields were planted and harvested, and that trade routes remained open. In a world that's often dazzled by the glittering achievements of the powerful, it's easy to overlook the crucial role of those who actually keep the wheels turning. These artisans, traders, and farmers may not have worn gold crowns or issued decrees, but their contributions were no less vital. As we explore the depths of Muisca society, it's clear that the romance of golden leaders and mystical rituals is just one layer of a much richer tapestry. The reality was a complex web of interactions and dependencies, where every class played its part. It's a reminder that history is often glamorized by the victors, but it's the everyday people who shape its course. So, next time you hear tales of the Muisca's legendary wealth, remember the skilled hands and sharp minds that made it all possible. The middle class may not have been enshrined in gold, but their legacy is just as enduring. And as we continue our journey through this fascinating civilization, let's keep in mind that the true heart of the Muisca wasn't just in their treasures, but in the lives and labors of those who lived beneath the gleaming surface. If the Muisca middle class was the glue holding society together, then the laborers and slaves were the nails and timber, building the whole structure from the ground up. Let's face it, someone had to do the heavy lifting, while the Zipa and Zak were busy playing king of the mountain with their golden toys. Life in the trenches was anything but glamorous, but without these folks, the whole gilded system would have collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Kicking off with the nitty-gritty, Muisca laborers were the ones who made sure that everything from agriculture to construction ran like a well-oiled machine. These guys and gals worked the fields, dug the salt mines, and built the roads that made Muisca trade possible. We're talking about a workforce that could rival today's marathon runners in endurance, only instead of medals they got. Well, not much at all. For the average laborer, life was a series of sunrises and back-breaking toil, with little more than a roof over their heads and food in their bellies as reward. Switching gears to the Muisca's unique twist on labor practices, enter the meter system. Now, before you think this is some kind of ancient Peruvian dance craze, let's clear up the confusion. The meter was a rotational labor system, a sort of community service on steroids, where every able-bodied person took turns working on public projects. It was like being on a volunteer roster, but with a lot more shoveling and a lot less choice. The meter was a cornerstone of Muisca society, ensuring that the infrastructure got built and maintained without the need for hired help. It's a concept that has a certain romantic appeal, a society pulling together for the common good. But let's not kid ourselves. It was hard work, plain and simple. And then there were the slaves. No sugarcoating here. Slavery in Muisca society was as real as it gets. They were often prisoners of war or individuals who had fallen into debt, and their lives were dictated by the whims of their owners. While some might have found themselves in domestic service, others weren't so lucky, ending up in the punishing environment of the salt mines or other grueling labor. And if you're thinking, at least they had weekends off, think again. For many slaves, life was a relentless cycle of toil with freedom as distant as the stars. Yet, unlike the grim image of slavery we might conjure from other historical contexts, Muisca slavery had its quirks. It wasn't always a life sentence. There were instances where a slave could earn their freedom or be integrated into their owner's family. It's a small consolation, but worth noting in the grand tapestry of human history. And while it's tempting to view this through the lens of a more progressive practice, let's not get carried away. The reality was stark, and the hierarchy was rigid. The laborers and slaves might have been the backbone of society, but they were far from its heart. Economics played a massive role in these dynamics, of course. The Muisca economy, as we've already seen, was a complex web of trade and tribute. Laborers were crucial in maintaining this system, ensuring that goods flowed smoothly from one region to another. The sheer logistical challenge of moving salt, emeralds, and textiles across the rugged Colombian landscape was no small feat. Imagine hauling sacks of salt over mountain passes that make the Appalachian Trail look like a Sunday stroll. It's a wonder anyone made it in time for dinner. Speaking of economics, let's talk numbers. Salt, for instance, wasn't just any old seasoning. It was a currency of its own. The Zipaquira salt mines were a gold mine, metaphorically speaking, with salt blocks being exchanged for goods far and wide. The laborers who extracted this white gold were essentially minting money for the Muisca elite. And while they didn't get a cut of the profits, their labor was what kept the whole operation afloat. It's a classic story. The few get rich, while the many do the heavy lifting. But let's not paint the Muisca as heartless overlords. Their society had a communal aspect that softened the harshness of its hierarchy. For instance, the mid-Aos, those participating in the meter, weren't left to fend for themselves after their stint of communal labor. The community often supported them, ensuring they didn't fall behind in their own fields during their service. In a way, it was a social safety net, albeit one woven from the same fibers as the whip. Now, let's put the spotlight on the lesser-known side of Muisca life. The artisans who couldn't quite make it into the middle class. These folks were skilled, no doubt, but their crafts didn't always translate into upward mobility. Picture a potter crafting exquisite ceramics, each piece a masterwork of design and utility. Yet despite their skill, they remained on the fringes, respected for their craft, but not reaping the rewards of their talents. It's a tale as old as time. Talent doesn't always equal wealth, especially when the deck is stacked against you. The Muisca laborers and slaves might not have had the gilded lifestyle of their rulers or even the modest comforts of the middle class, but they were the engine of the society, powering its every move. They lived in a world where hard work was the norm and the rewards were as scarce as a snowstorm in the Sahara. Yet their contributions were undeniable, etching their mark on the history of a civilization that glittered above them. Of course, all of this was about to change with the arrival of the Spanish, a plot twist that would upend the Muisca world in ways they couldn't have imagined. But let's not rush ahead. There's still more to uncover in the lives of these unsung heroes, the laborers and slaves who built the foundations of a society that dazzled with gold but was grounded in grit. Their story is a reminder that history isn't just written by the victors. It's built by the hands of those who often go unremembered. So next time you hear tales of El Dorado, spare a thought for the ones who made the legend possible, even if they never got to bask in its glow. And so, our journey through the rich tapestry of Muisca society takes us from the gritty reality of laborers back to the glistening myths that have captured imaginations for centuries. Let's set the stage for our myth-busting extravaganza. we're diving into the legendary pool of El Dorado, a tale so deeply embedded in popular lore that it's practically the Bigfoot of historical legends. Except instead of a hairy giant, we've got a golden city, or in this case, a golden ceremony. Let's rewind to the 16th century, when Spanish conquistadors, fueled by dreams of unimaginable wealth, landed on the shores of the New World. They came armed with swords, crossbows, and an unquenchable thirst for gold. Rumors of El Dorado, a city or king dripping in gold, had them drooling like kids in a candy store. Imagine their disappointment when all they found were mountains and rivers. But hey, when you're knee-deep in ambition, you tend to see what you want. Now, here's the kicker. The legend of El Dorado didn't start with a city, but with a ceremony. The Muisca had this rather dazzling tradition where the new Zipa would cover himself in gold dust and float on a raft to the center of Lake Guadavida. Surrounded by priests tossing gold and precious offerings into the water, this ritual was a golden spectacle, quite literally. It symbolized the Zipa's divine connection to the gods, a spiritual transaction, if you will. Picture it. A human glitter ball gliding across a lake. That's the kind of image that sticks in the mind and morphs into legends. So, what's the reality check here? First off, the Muisca weren't hoarding piles of gold like dragon smorg. Gold was sacred to them, a medium for religious offerings rather than a currency for trade. The Spanish, driven by their own cultural obsession with wealth, misinterpreted this ritual as evidence of a golden metropolis. Spoiler alert. No such city existed. The Muisca's gold was not amassed in palatial splendor, but dispersed in intricate artifacts and ceremonial offerings. Think of it as the ultimate sacrifice, not a treasure chest waiting to be plundered. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The notion of El Dorado did more than just fuel Spanish greed. It inspired countless expeditions and shaped the course of history. It's a prime example of how myths, even when debunked, hold power, drive exploration and discovery, even if they're based more on fantasy than fact. The irony. While chasing gold, the Spanish missed the true wealth of Muisca society, its people, culture, and knowledge. Now, speaking of myths, let's talk about the Muisca's supposed penchant for wild ceremonies. Yes, they had rituals that would make your average office party look like a snooze fest, but were they as wild as legend suggests? The Muisca were a deeply spiritual people, and their ceremonies were both communal and cosmic. These events weren't just excuses to get sloshed on chicha, though that did happen. They were about reinforcing social bonds and paying homage to their pantheon of gods, like Chiminigagua, the creator deity. Take the festival of Suamox, for instance. This was the Muisca's own Burning Man, minus the desert and tech billionaires. It was a grand affair held in the Temple of the Sun in Sargamoso, drawing people from across the region. The festival involved music, dance, and offerings to the sun god Sai. It was a time for renewal and reflection, a spiritual reset button for the community. But if you're picturing a bacchanalian orgy of excess, think again. The Muisca festivals had a solemnity that underscored their celebrations, a reminder that even in revelry there was reverence. And then there's the legend of Barchica, a cultural hero who, according to Muisca lore, taught them agriculture, religion, and the arts. He's the Muisca equivalent of a Renaissance man, minus the frilly collars. Barchica's tale includes a dramatic episode where he split the rocks at Tequendama Falls to save his people from a great flood. The scientific reality. The falls are actually a natural geological formation, not a monument to divine intervention. Yet, the myth of Barchica served as a powerful narrative, embodying the ideals of leadership and ingenuity. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the allure of these myths. They offer a window into the values and beliefs of the Muisca, a society where the spiritual and the material were inextricably linked. The stories of El Dorado and Barchica are not just flights of fancy. They are reflections of a worldview that saw the sacred in the everyday. It's a perspective that, while alien to the gold-hungry conquistadors, underscores the richness of Muisca culture. But let's not kid ourselves. The myths also played a role in their downfall. The Spanish, driven by tales of inexhaustible riches, were relentless, and while the Muisca did their best to resist, their society was ultimately overwhelmed by the European juggernaut. The conquistadors might not have found a golden city, but they left a trail of destruction in their wake, altering the course of Muisca history forever. Yet, even as we peel back the layers of myth, there's a certain magic that remains. The allure of El Dorado and the wisdom of Barchica continue to capture the imagination. They remind us that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. And while we may never find the lost city of gold, we can still discover the enduring legacy of the Muisca, a civilization that, despite its eventual demise, continues to shine brightly in the annals of history. As we wrap up our myth-busting session, let's look forward to the final chapter of this Muisca saga, where we'll explore the impact of Spanish colonization and the echoes of Muisca culture that resonate today. But for now, let's savor the blend of legend and reality, the glittering tales and the gritty truths that make history an endless source of fascination. After all, who needs fiction when the past is this rich? So, as we step off the mythical raft of legend and land back on the shores of reality, let's tackle the enduring footprint of the Muisca. Sure, the Spanish conquistadors weren't exactly gentle guests. They were more like uninvited party crashers who left the place a mess. But despite their best efforts to erase the Muisca's legacy, this society left more than just legends and gold dust in their wake. First off, let's talk about something that's a bit greener than gold: environmental sustainability. The Muisca might not have buzzwords like eco-friendly or carbon footprint in their lexicon, but they were practicing a version of it long before it became trendy. Their agricultural methods were ingenious, particularly the use of terrace farming in the unforgiving Andean highlands. By creating stepped plots of land, they maximized the arable area and reduced soil erosion. It's a technique that even modern farmers could take notes from. Think of it as ancient engineering with a side of environmental awareness. The Muisca also had this nifty irrigation system, harnessing the natural flow of water to their fields. They didn't just toss seeds into the ground and hope for the best. They understood their environment deeply, adapting their farming techniques to suit the terrain. This wasn't just about growing food. It was about crafting a sustainable lifestyle that respected the natural world. Fast forward a few centuries, and we could all use a bit of that Muisca magic in our current approach to agriculture. Now, if you're wondering how they managed to keep track of all this without spreadsheets or smartphone apps, allow me to introduce you to the quipu. The Muisca didn't use written language in the way we do, but they had quipus, knotted cords used for record keeping. Think of it as ancient data storage, a tactile ledger that chronicled everything from crop yields to census data. It's a testament to their organizational prowess, a society that managed to keep its ducks, or should I say, maize stalks, in a row without a single sticky note. Speaking of organization, let's delve into the Muisca's social hierarchy, an intricate system that historians can't help but geek out over. The structure wasn't just about who got to wear the fanciest feathered headdress. It was a complex web of roles and responsibilities that kept the society ticking like a well-oiled machine. From the Zipa and Zak reigning supreme to the caciques managing regional affairs, and the artisans and laborers ensuring the day-to-day operations, it was a multi-layered society that thrived on interdependence. What's fascinating here is the balance between centralized authority and regional autonomy. The Muisca Confederation wasn't a single monolithic entity, but a coalition of allied groups. It's like a historical balancing act, and the Muisca were the tightrope walkers. This system allowed for both unity and diversity, ensuring that while they shared common goals, individual communities retained their uniqueness. It's a political structure that's surprisingly modern, offering lessons in governance that still resonate today. And let's not forget the cultural influences that the Muisca left behind. They were master weavers, not just of textiles, but of cultural narratives. Their myths and legends, like the tale of Barchica, have survived the test of time, weaving themselves into the fabric of Colombian identity. These stories weren't just bedtime tales. They were a way of preserving history, passing down values and knowledge through generations. It's a legacy that continues to echo in the highlands today, a reminder of a people who, despite conquest and change, left an indelible mark on their land. But let's not sugarcoat the aftermath of Spanish arrival. The Muisca civilization, like many others across the Americas, faced devastation and upheaval. The Spanish were relentless in their quest for gold, and the Muisca, despite their resilience, couldn't withstand the onslaught. Yet, through the ashes of conquest, the Muisca culture endured. Their agricultural practices, social structures, and stories were absorbed into the colonial tapestry, influencing the development of the region in subtle but significant ways. Take, for instance, the continuation of Muisca agricultural techniques. Even as the colonial economy shifted toward more European farming methods, elements of Muisca ingenuity persisted. The terraces they constructed still contour the landscape, silent witnesses to a time when human activity harmonized with nature. It's a legacy that speaks volumes about adaptability and resilience, qualities that allow the Muisca to thrive in their environment and continue to inspire today. And then there's the linguistic legacy. While the Muisca language, Muisca, has largely faded, it has left traces in local dialects and place names. It's like an ancient echo, a whisper of the past that reminds us of the people who once spoke it. Efforts to preserve and revive the language are underway, a testament to the enduring importance of cultural heritage. It's a reminder that even when a language falls silent, its spirit can linger on. Now, let's wrap this up with a nod to those historians who can't get enough of the Muisca's story. Why? Because the Muisca offer a narrative that's both cautionary and inspirational. They were a society that, despite the odds, crafted a sophisticated civilization, balancing spirituality with practicality and myth with reality. They remind us that history isn't just about the past, it's a mirror reflecting back on our present. The Muisca teach us about the importance of sustainable practices, the beauty of cultural diversity, and the delicate dance of power and responsibility. As we close this chapter on the Muisca, let's leave with this thought. History is not just a collection of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human experience. The Muisca were more than their gold. They were a society rich in knowledge, culture, and resilience. So, the next time you hear tales of El Dorado, remember the true treasure wasn't the gold, but the legacy of a people who knew how to shine in more ways than one. You're standing in a bustling medieval market square, the air thick with the scent of freshly baked bread mingling with the less pleasant aromas of the local livestock. It's the 13th century, and while you're busy haggling over the price of a hunk of cheese, there's a far more powerful force at work, one that doesn't barter with coins, but with souls. The medieval church is not just a place of worship. It's a colossal institution with fingers in every pie, often literally, as the monks are known for their culinary skills. Yet, the church's real talent lies in shaping laws and squeezing wealth from the populace with the finesse of a master pickpocket. Let's dive into the mystery of how the church became the behemoth it was. Fast forward from the humble beginnings of Christianity, born in the Roman Empire with a ragtag group of followers who could barely fill a village hall. By the time the Middle Ages roll around, the church is no longer the underdog. It's the heavyweight champ slugging it out with kings for the title of most powerful entity in Europe. The church, with its sprawling network of cathedrals and abbeys, has a spiritual monopoly. And like any good monopoly, it's all about the economics, baby. Enter the infamous tithe. Picture this, 10% of everything you produce, from your wheat fields to your herd of sheep, goes straight to the church. And no, you can't just say you had a bad crop year and hope they look the other way. This is a non-negotiable divine tax. It's like the original subscription model, but instead of binging shows, you're buying a ticket to heaven. The church's coffers swell with these tithes, allowing them to build those awe-inspiring cathedrals with towering spires reaching out to the heavens, because nothing says, "We're holier than thou," quite like a stunning Gothic arch. But wait, the church isn't stopping there. Enter indulgences, the medieval equivalent of a get-out-of-jail-free card, except the jail is purgatory and the price is steep. Indulgences are a masterstroke of ecclesiastical marketing genius. Basically, you commit a sin, say, stealing your neighbor's cow, and instead of eternal damnation, you can pay the church to shave off a few years of your post-life sentence. It's a win-win. You get a cleaner slate, and the church pockets a tidy sum. You might wonder why people didn't just question this divine ATM system. Well, it's not like you can hop on Twitter and start a hashtag revolution. The church holds the keys to salvation, and in a world where life expectancy hovers around 35 years, no one's taking chances with the afterlife. Plus, the church isn't just about cash, it's also about power. The Pope, sitting snugly in Rome, is the spiritual CEO of Christendom, and he's not shy about flexing those papal muscles. Let's not forget the epic clashes between secular and spiritual powers. Picture a medieval version of WWE, with kings and popes as the main event. Take the investiture controversy of the 11th century, a dramatic showdown between Pope Gregory Roman VII and Emperor Henry Roman IV over who gets to appoint bishops. Spoiler: the Pope wins this one after Henry does the medieval walk of shame, trudging barefoot in the snow to beg for forgiveness. Talk about awkward office politics. The Church's laws are not just about maintaining spiritual order, they're about keeping the secular rulers in check. The Church can excommunicate a king faster than you can say heresy, which basically means kicking him out of the spiritual club and encouraging his subjects to rebel. It's a powerful political tool, and the kings know it. This is why they occasionally decide to rough up the clergy, or, if they're feeling particularly rebellious, start their own church. Looking at you, Henry Roman VIII. But let's not be too harsh. There's a reason this system held sway for so long. The medieval world is a chaotic place, and the Church offers stability, education, and a sense of community. It's the medieval version of a social safety net, albeit one with a lot of strings attached. The Church runs schools, hospitals, and even provides welfare for the poor. And while the laws can be brutal, they're also a reflection of a society trying to find balance between the earthly and the divine. As you wander back through that bustling market, you're no longer just a passive observer. You're part of a world where spiritual and secular forces are in constant tension, where the Church's influence is as pervasive as the air you breathe. It's a world of contradictions, where faith meets finance in a medieval dance of power. And while the Church's laws may seem harsh by today's standards, they're a testament to an institution that shaped the destiny of Europe for centuries. So next time you hear church bells ringing, remember, it's not just a call to prayer. It's the sound of history echoing through the ages. But while those church bells are ringing, somewhere in the shadowy corners of medieval Europe, darker forces are at play. Enter the Inquisition. Cue the ominous music. This isn't your run-of-the-mill Sunday sermon. It's a full-blown spiritual tribunal with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Imagine a world where the phrase trial by fire isn't just metaphorical. The Inquisition, with its infamous reputation, was the Church's heavy-handed attempt to root out heresy, a term as broad as the Church's reach. And trust me, it had very long arms. Let's set the stage. It's the 12th century, and heresy is the medieval equivalent of a viral tweet that just won't go away. People are questioning the Church, whispering about alternative spiritual paths, and heaven forbid, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the clergy isn't infallible. The Church, already feeling the heat from the secular powers, isn't about to let its authority be undermined by a bunch of rebellious thinkers. Thus begins the Inquisition, a campaign to purify the faith, though not exactly with kid gloves. Now, before you picture a medieval free-for-all where every Tom, Dick, and Harry gets tossed onto a pyre, let's take a closer look. The Inquisition was surprisingly bureaucratic. Forget the image of wild-eyed zealots running rampant. Picture instead a methodical process with a paper trail that would make your local DMV proud. These inquisitorial trials were about as dry as the parchment they were written on, with stakes higher than a 3-story cathedral. One of the most notorious inquisitors was Bernard Gouy, a man who took his job a little too seriously, like a medieval Dwight Schrute with a penchant for burning books and people. Gouy was an administrator extraordinaire, documenting cases with the precision of a Swiss watch. From 1307 to 1323, he presided over hundreds of trials, often against the Cathars, a sect accused of heretical beliefs. And let's just say, the Cathars didn't exactly get a fair shake. Gouy was known for his firm belief that a good heretic was a confessed heretic, and if confession didn't come voluntarily, well, there were ways to encourage it. Speaking of confessions, let's talk about the methods used to extract them. If you've ever had a dentist's appointment that felt like torture, imagine that, but with more, shall we say, medieval instruments. The Inquisition was infamous for its use of torture to secure confessions, an art form in its own grim way. The rack, the strappado, and the thumbscrew were all part of the Inquisitor's toolkit, applied with the kind of enthusiasm you'd expect from someone who didn't have Netflix to pass the time. But here's a twist. Not every trial ended with a dramatic finale of flames and ashes. In fact, many cases resulted in penances that were more about public humiliation than public execution. Imagine being sentenced to wear a yellow cross on your clothing, a medieval scarlet letter that marked you as a heretic. It's like being unfriended by the entire village. Still, for those who ended up on the wrong side of the Inquisitor's bench, the stakes were as high as their anxiety levels. And why, you ask, would the average medieval Joe or Jane risk this kind of attention? Well, it turns out that sharing your secret herbal remedies or critiquing the local priest's latest sermon could land you in hot water faster than you can say heresy. The church wasn't just policing theology. It was monitoring anything that could challenge its authority. Herbalists, often women, faced accusations of witchcraft, partly because their potions worked a little too well for comfort. In a world where modern medicine was a few centuries away, these remedies were both a lifeline and a potential noose. Criticizing the clergy was another surefire way to get noticed by the church's version of HR. The medieval clergy, despite their vows of poverty, could be a flamboyant bunch, prone to the occasional overindulgence. Pointing this out, however, was akin to poking a bear with a particularly sharp stick. The church didn't take kindly to dissent, and an accusation of heresy was a convenient way to silence critics. Yet, despite the fire and brimstone, there's a certain dark allure to the Inquisition, a testament to our fascination with the macabre. The idea of a secret tribunal rooting out hidden dangers taps into our love for drama and mystery. It's the ultimate medieval whodunit, with stakes that make modern thrillers look like bedtime stories. But let's not romanticize too much. The Inquisition was a brutal chapter in a brutal age, fueled by fear and a desire for control. It was a time when stepping out of line could literally cost you your life, and yet it also reflects a society grappling with the challenge of maintaining unity in a diverse and often chaotic world. As the church tightened its grip, it faced an increasingly complex landscape where faith, power, and survival were inextricably linked. So, as we leave the fires of the Inquisition smoldering in the past, remember that history isn't just a collection of dusty old stories. It's a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature, where the quest for power and the fear of the unknown collide in spectacular fashion. And while the church may have been the heavyweight in this medieval drama, the echoes of its actions reverberate through history, reminding us that the battle for hearts and minds is as old as time itself. Stay tuned, because the story's only just heating up. And so, as the smoke from the Inquisition still lingers in the air, let's pivot and peer into the steely-eyed gaze of medieval economics, where moral mandates meet money matters. Buckle up, because we're diving into the church's prohibition on usury, a term you might have heard tossed around like a medieval hot potato. Usury, the practice of charging interest on loans, was a big no-no according to the church. Why? Well, charging interest was seen as profiting from someone else's misfortune, and in a world where community was your life insurance, that was a cardinal sin. Now you might think, who needs loans in the medieval era anyway? But back then, just like today, people needed a little financial boost now and then. Maybe your crop failed, or perhaps you want to expand your alehouse empire. Whatever the reason, borrowing money was as common as a knight's ego. The church, however, had a monopoly on morality and declared usury a sin, casting a long shadow over medieval economics. Here's the kicker. Banning usury didn't stop people from needing loans. Instead, it created a loophole the size of a cathedral door. Enter the Lombards and Jewish moneylenders. These groups, often outsiders in medieval society, became the unofficial bankers of Europe. They charged interest, but since they weren't bound by the church's rules, it was technically kosher. Pun very much intended. The church's stance on usury wasn't just about maintaining moral high ground, it was also about power. By controlling financial practices, the church extended its influence far beyond the pulpit, but the economic consequences were profound. The lack of legal lending options stifled growth, making it harder for medieval entrepreneurs to get off the ground. It was like trying to open a startup today without venture capital. Good luck with that. Now, let's switch gears to a topic that sounds more like a Monty Python skit than a serious historical event: the trial of animals. Yes, you heard me right. The medieval church, in its infinite wisdom, sometimes put animals on trial. Imagine a pig donning a little black hat, standing accused of trampling a field. It sounds absurd, but these trials were surprisingly common, with records of animal trials dating back to the 13th century. You might be wondering, why would anyone bother? Well, In a world where superstition and religion were intertwined like a poorly baked pretzel, these trials were a way to maintain cosmic balance. Animals were believed to be under the devil's influence, and holding them accountable was a way to exorcise evil. This wasn't just a bizarre pastime. It reflected a deeper belief system where the divine and the mundane were inseparable. These trials were conducted with all the pomp of a human trial. There were witnesses, judges, and sometimes even legal representation for the accused animal. The outcomes, however, were often grim. Convicted animals were punished, sometimes executed, as a public spectacle. It was part morality play, part deterrent, and wholly strange to our modern sensibilities. As we chuckle at the absurdity, let's not forget the underlying power dynamics. These trials reinforced the Church's authority over every aspect of life, from the grand to the grotesque. By extending its reach to even the animal kingdom, the Church demonstrated its omnipresence, reminding everyone that nothing was beyond its purview. Now, what about that romantic notion of chivalry? You know, the idea of a noble knight, shiny armor, and a heart full of honor. Spoiler alert. The reality was a bit grittier. Chivalry was less about rescuing damsels, and more about a medieval PR campaign to rein in the unruly behavior of knights. These guys were the medieval equivalent of rock stars, and not always in a good way. The Church, ever the moral compass, saw an opportunity. By linking chivalry with Christian virtue, the Church sought to tame these warriors, channeling their aggression towards more, shall we say, constructive ends. It wasn't just about being a gentleman. It was about molding knights into defenders of the faith, a convenient way to direct military might where it best suited ecclesiastical interests. Chivalry also had economic implications. The code dictated that knights should be generous, especially to the Church, which was always a fan of donations. This wasn't just a spiritual guideline, it was a financial strategy. The knights, bound by honor and duty, often found themselves funding church projects, whether through donations or bequests. It was like having a subscription service, but instead of getting a glossy magazine, you got eternal salvation. So, while the legends of chivalry might evoke images of courtly love and gallant deeds, the reality was more about control, power, and you guessed it, economics. The Church, with its moral mandates, was the puppet master, pulling the strings of medieval society in a dance as intricate as any courtly ball. In this medieval world, where belief systems dictated social norms, the Church stood as the ultimate arbiter of right and wrong. Its influence was both pervasive and profound, shaping everything from financial transactions to social rituals. And while we might snicker at the absurdity of animal trials or question the true nobility of chivalry, these elements provide a window into the complex tapestry of medieval life. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about the human stories that unfold within these frameworks. The Church's laws, with all their quirks and contradictions, reveal a society grappling with the challenges of faith, power, and survival. And while the Church may have been the heavyweight in this medieval drama, its legacy is a reminder of the enduring dance between the sacred and the secular, a ballet as old as time itself. Stay tuned, because this medieval tapestry is far from finished. And as our medieval drama continues, let's pivot to an unexpected powerhouse of the era, the medieval university. If you think of universities today as the bastions of free thought and late-night pizza, think again. Picture them instead as the Church's secret weapon for intellectual dominion. These institutions were like the Hogwarts of the medieval world, minus the spell casting, though some might argue that Latin grammar has its own dark magic. Now, before you envision a bunch of monks in robes handing out diplomas, let's get the facts straight. The first universities, like the University of Bologna in 1088, weren't just about learning for learning's sake. They were about control. The Church realized that if you control education, you control the narrative. And in a time when most folks couldn't read a menu, let alone a manuscript, literacy was as powerful as a king's sword. The Church laid the groundwork for this educational revolution, establishing universities that would eventually spread across Europe like medieval wildfire. Oxford popped up around 1096, while Paris followed suit in the mid-12th century. These universities became the medieval version of the Internet, a hub of knowledge, albeit with fewer cat videos. Here's where it gets juicy. The Church's grip on education was a double-edged sword. On one hand, they fueled the dissemination of knowledge, translating ancient texts and opening the door to Greek philosophy. Aristotle, Plato, and the gang were back in vogue, despite having been on the Church's no-fly list for a while. But on the flip side, there was a strict curriculum. Think less choose your own adventure, and more stick to the syllabus or else. This brings us to a curious paradox: censorship in an era of enlightenment. The Church, while promoting education, also acted like the world's strictest librarian. They decided what books were on the reading list, and anything deemed heretical was swiftly blacklisted. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum, fancy Latin for list of prohibited books, was the Church's way of controlling the intellectual traffic. Why the tight leash, you ask? Well, knowledge is power, and too much power in the wrong hands could challenge the Church's authority. Imagine if everyone started questioning doctrines or, heaven forbid, reading the Bible in their vernacular. Chaos, rebellion, a world where peasants had opinions, the horror. Despite these restrictions, or perhaps because of them, medieval universities became hotbeds of intellectual ferment. Students and professors, those rebellious spirits, often found clever ways to sidestep censorship. They engaged in heated debates, known as disputations, where they could explore controversial ideas under the guise of academic inquiry. It's like when your friend says, "I'm just playing devil's advocate," but you're pretty sure they mean it. One of the most legendary figures to emerge from this intellectually charged atmosphere was Thomas Aquinas. This Dominican friar was like the Einstein of the Middle Ages, blending Christian theology with Aristotelian philosophy. He wrote the Summa Theologica, a hefty tome that attempted to reconcile faith and reason with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Aquinas's work was a game-changer, but it also highlighted the Church's tightrope walk between fostering intellectual growth and maintaining doctrinal control. His ideas about natural law and ethics pushed the envelope, but they also reinforced the Church's theological framework. It was a classic case of innovation within limits, or as the Church might say, think freely, but not too freely. Meanwhile, as the Church played its educational chess game, a curious thing happened in the realm of science. The medieval period, often unfairly dubbed the Dark Ages, actually saw significant advancements. Sure, we didn't have iPhones or electric scooters, but medieval scholars were busy laying the groundwork for future scientific revolutions. Take, for instance, the work of medieval polymaths like Roger Bacon. This Franciscan friar, a contemporary of Aquinas, was a champion of empirical methods. Think experimentation and observation over relying solely on ancient texts. Bacon's emphasis on optics and the scientific method foreshadowed the Renaissance, proving that even in a time of intellectual constraints, sparks of innovation could ignite. The Church, while often portrayed as a monolithic roadblock to progress, played a more nuanced role. On one hand, they funded and encouraged scholarly pursuits that aligned with their worldview. On the other, they were wary of anything that might challenge the established order. It was a delicate dance of fostering curiosity while ensuring it didn't unravel the fabric of ecclesiastical control. Let's not forget astrology, the medieval equivalent of checking your horoscope on a daily basis. It was a serious field of study, and even the Church had a love-hate relationship with it. Astrology was seen as a way to understand God's creation, but predicting the future, that was a step too far, bordering on heresy. The line between science and superstition was as thin as a monk's hair shirt. In the end, the Church's grip on education and knowledge was both a catalyst for enlightenment and a brake on radical thought. It was a time of contradictions, where intellectual exploration thrived within the confines of orthodoxy. The universities, those medieval incubators of thought, were both a testament to the Church's influence and a reminder of its limitations. As we wrap up this chapter of our medieval tale, remember that history is never black and white. It's a tapestry of vivid colors, woven together by the actions, innovations, and restrictions of those who came before us. The Church's role in education was as complex as the Gothic cathedrals it built, intricate, awe-inspiring, and full of hidden corners. We're not done yet, though. The story of medieval Europe is far from over, and in the next part, we'll dive deeper into the social and cultural currents that shaped this fascinating era. So stay tuned, because the plot is about to thicken like a good medieval stew. As we prepare to wrap up this medieval roller coaster, let's hit pause for a moment to reflect on the enduring legacy of those church laws that shaped centuries, and let's face it, still echo in today's world like a particularly persistent Gregorian chant. You might think that a set of rules from a few hundred years back would be as relevant as a jousting tournament at your local Renaissance fair, but hold on to your chainmail. These laws had legs. Take the tithe, for instance. It was the original pay-to-play model, a spiritual tax that emptied pockets and filled the church's coffers. Fast forward to today, and you'll find a reflection of this in modern tax systems, where the government takes its cut, promising roads and schools in return, though perhaps not eternal salvation. The idea that a central authority can demand resources to maintain social order is a legacy that still keeps our accountants busy every April. And then there's the church's hand in shaping legal systems. Ecclesiastical courts were the medieval version of Judge Judy, but with less sass and more Latin. They dealt with everything from marriage disputes to heresy trials, laying groundwork for modern legal principles like due process and the right to a fair trial. Sure, they also indulged in some light torture, but hey, nobody's perfect. The Church's insistence on a codified set of laws echoes in today's legal systems, where we still debate the balance between justice and mercy. Now, let's talk about indulgences, the medieval get-out-of-jail cards that would make any Monopoly player envious. The idea that you could buy your way out of trouble wasn't just a clever fundraising tactic. It set a precedent for modern financial systems where wealth can sometimes tilt the scales of justice. It's a reminder that money has always talked, even when it was speaking in Latin. The Inquisition, with its dark allure and grim methods, might seem like a relic best left in the dusty annals of history, but it offers a sobering lesson on the dangers of unchecked authority. The fervor to root out heresy echoes in modern times as a cautionary tale about the perils of dogma and the importance of protecting dissenting voices. When we see modern societies wrestling with issues of free speech and religious intolerance, it's hard not to hear the distant echoes of those medieval trials. And let's not forget the Church's stance on usury, a stance that had economic ripples still felt today. The medieval aversion to charging interest influenced financial systems long after the Church softened its position. Today, debates about fair lending practices and the morality of debt have roots in these age-old arguments. The Church's attempt to control economic behavior showcases a timeless struggle between moral directives and market realities. But what about those animal trials? Surely they were just the whimsical antics of an overzealous clergy, right? Well, not quite. These trials highlight an ongoing human tendency to impose order on chaos, to make sense of the senseless. Today, we might laugh at the idea of putting a pig on trial, but we still see echoes of this in our attempts to legislate and moralize human behavior. It's a reminder that the quest for control and understanding is as old as civilization itself. Chivalry, too, with its romanticized image of noble knights and courtly love, turns out to be a clever PR campaign by the Church to curb the unruly behavior of its military class. The idea that a code of honor could civilize the battlefield speaks to our ongoing belief in the power of ideals to shape conduct, even when reality stubbornly refuses to comply. Today, we still talk about chivalry in terms of noble conduct, though our modern knights are more likely to be holding doors open than wielding swords. So, how do these medieval musings illuminate our present? First, they remind us that history is a mirror, reflecting the complexities of human nature and the institutions we create. The Church's laws, with all their quirks and contradictions, highlight an enduring dance between power, belief, and human behavior. They show us that while the players change, the game remains remarkably consistent. Understanding the past gives us a lens to view modern religious and legal systems, helping us see that today's debates are often the latest iterations of age-old questions. By peering into the medieval world, we see that the struggle for power, the quest for justice, and the reconciliation of faith and reason are timeless themes. They echo in our boardrooms and courtrooms, in our debates over morality and money. In the end, the medieval Church's legacy is not just a collection of oddities and archaic laws. It's a testament to the enduring human quest for order in chaos, for meaning in the mundane. As we close the book on this chapter of history, let's carry forward its lessons with a sense of curiosity and humility, understanding that while we may have traded parchment for pixels, the story of humanity is as intricate and compelling as ever. So next time you hear the phrase, history repeats itself, remember, it's not just a cliché. It's a reminder to pay attention because the echoes of the past are always whispering in the corridors of the present. In the vibrant, bustling streets of 1930s Atlanta, a city as complex as a Rubik's Cube, a young Martin Luther King Jr. was busy setting his grandmother's dress on fire. No, this wasn't a symbolic protest against fashion tyranny, just a classic childhood misadventure. This was the kind of thing that happened when you handed a curious kid a pair of matches and a curious lack of supervision. Little did anyone know that this boy would grow up to ignite a very different kind of fire across America. Martin Luther King Jr., or MLK to those who like their heroes with a three-letter acronym, was born on January 15, 1929, in a world where racial segregation laws were as common as Coca-Cola ads in the South. His upbringing in Atlanta was deeply influenced by his father, Martin Luther King Sr., a pastor who was as formidable at the pulpit as he was loving at home. Daddy King, as he was affectionately called, was not just a spiritual leader but a civil rights activist himself. He taught Martin the power of words, the strength of conviction, and perhaps most importantly, the value of a well-timed rhetorical flourish. Now, let's talk about the King family home. Imagine a place where intellectual debates were as frequent as the Sunday roast. King's mother, Alberta, was a schoolteacher who believed education was the key to unlocking any door, even the ones barred by Jim Crow laws. The Kings didn't just talk about change, they lived it. And Martin, soaking it all in like a sponge, was marinating in a potent mix of activism, faith, and an unyielding sense of justice. Atlanta, during King's formative years, was a city of contrasts. It was the birthplace of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but also a hub where separate but equal was the law of the land. The dichotomy was as stark as sweet tea and unsweetened reality. King was acutely aware of this from a young age. One could say the city itself was a classroom, with segregation signs teaching lessons in inequality more vividly than any textbook could. By the time Martin was 15, he was ready for college. Yes, you heard that right. 15. While most teenagers were trying to figure out how to manage acne, King was entering Morehouse College, an institution renowned for producing African-American leaders. Morehouse was where King met Benjamin E. Mays, the college president, whose speeches were as inspiring as a double espresso shot. Mays challenged King to see the fight for racial equality as not just a possibility, but an obligation. He was like the Yoda to King's Skywalker, minus the green skin and syntax quirks. During his time at Morehouse, King was exposed to a world of ideas that would shape his activism. He read Thoreau's essays on civil disobedience and grappled with the works of Gandhi, whose nonviolent resistance tactics would later become central to King's approach. King's college years were a time of intellectual ferment, where he was not just learning facts, but crafting a worldview that would eventually move mountains, or at least shake up the status quo. But let's not forget, King was still a teenager. He was known for his mischievous grin and a penchant for practical jokes, a reminder that even future icons are not immune to the charms of youthful antics. His time at Morehouse wasn't all serious debates and philosophical musings. There was laughter, camaraderie, and the occasional cheeky escapade. As King matured, he began to understand the absurdity and cruelty of racial segregation more deeply. The laws were designed to keep African Americans in their place, a place that was invariably inferior. Signs marked whites only were a daily slap in the face, a constant reminder of a system that was rigged against him from birth. Yet, instead of succumbing to bitterness, King, buoyed by his family's teachings and his own burgeoning faith, began to see the potential for change. He understood that the same system that oppressed him could be challenged and ultimately transformed. In his early years, King also learned the importance of strategic thinking. His father often spoke of using one's head as much as one's heart. King Sr. was a man who could hold his own in a theological debate, and he passed on to his son the ability to argue passionately and persuasively. This skill would prove invaluable in the years to come when King Jr. would face not just opposition, but outright hostility. So, as we wrap up this first chapter in the life of Martin Luther King, Jr., let's remember that he wasn't born a legend. He was a boy who, like many, had to navigate the complexities and contradictions of a racially divided world. But unlike many, he emerged from his early years with an unshakable belief in equality and justice, a belief that would soon set the nation ablaze, this time with the flames of change. While King was busy shaping his belief in equality into a tool sharp enough to carve out social change, the world outside his academic bubble was boiling over with tension. This brings us to Montgomery, Alabama, a place where the buses were rolling, but equality was stuck in neutral. Here, on December 1, 1955, we meet Rosa Parks, a woman whose quiet defiance on a city bus would become a catalyst for a movement. She wasn't the first to refuse a bus seat. Others had done it before, but Parks' arrest was like setting off fireworks in a powder keg. Her act of resistance was less about a single seat and more about challenging the very structure of segregation, much like trying to dismantle a sandcastle with a single wave. Rosa Parks' arrest was the spark, but the Montgomery bus boycott was the roaring blaze. Picture this. For 381 days, African Americans in Montgomery refused to ride the city buses. That's over a year of walking, carpooling, and hitching rides in a city where the sun could fry an egg on the sidewalk. The boycott wasn't just a stand against racial segregation. It was a masterclass in economic warfare. The bus company, which was used to making a tidy profit off the backs of African American riders, who made up about 75% of their clientele, suddenly found itself hemorrhaging money. Talk about hitting them where it hurts, right in the wallet. Enter Martin Luther King, Jr., the fresh-faced pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, who was about to become the reluctant voice of a revolution. King had charisma and conviction, but wasn't yet the household name he would become. His leadership style began to emerge during the boycott, not just through rousing speeches, but in the way he organized the community. King's approach was a blend of strategic genius and everyday practicality. He was like a maestro, orchestrating a symphony of resistance, with each participant playing their part to perfection. Now, let's talk carpooling. Back in the 1950s, carpooling wasn't quite the eco-friendly choice it is today. In fact, King once quipped about the luxury of riding in a carpool, a cheeky nod to the fact that most African Americans couldn't afford cars of their own. It wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was a necessity born out of economic disparity. The boycott forced people to get creative, sharing rides in a way that was as much about community spirit as it was about getting from point A to point B without setting foot on a bus. The boycott was as much about tired feet as it was about social justice, a testament to the fact that change often requires discomfort. Imagine the daily grind of walking miles to work, school, and church, day in and day out. Yet, instead of breaking spirits, this hardship forged an unbreakable bond among the participants. The streets of Montgomery became a stage for a different kind of performance, one where determination took center stage and resilience got a standing ovation. The economic impact on the bus company was significant, but the real victory was in the courts. In November 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. This was a seismic shift, the kind of courtroom drama that even the best legal TV shows couldn't script. The decision didn't just change the law, it sent ripples through the entire country, proving that coordinated, non-violent resistance could topple the seemingly untouchable pillars of segregation. But let's not romanticize this too much. While the victory was sweet, it was also fraught with danger and resistance. King and other leaders faced harassment, threats, and even physical attacks. In January 1956, King's house was bombed, a stark reminder that the fight for justice often came at a steep personal cost. Yet, in the face of violence, King preached nonviolence, turning the other cheek like a modern-day Gandhi in a preacher's robe. This was the crucible in which King's leadership was forged. He learned to navigate the treacherous waters of civil rights activism, balancing the need for immediate action with the patience required for lasting change. His speeches during this time were filled with the optimism of a man who truly believed in the arc of the moral universe bending towards justice. King's words were like a balm for the weary souls of those who walked miles under the Alabama sun, a reminder that their struggle was not in vain. As we move forward, remember that the Montgomery bus boycott was more than just a local protest. It was a template for future civil rights actions. It showed the world that unity was powerful, that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they stood together. And it was the proving ground for Martin Luther King Jr., who emerged as a leader not just for African Americans, but for anyone who believed in the possibility of a more just world. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and the road ahead is paved with both challenges and triumphs. As we stride forward, the echoes of Montgomery's triumph are still reverberating through the corridors of American consciousness, setting the stage for Martin Luther King Jr.'s next act on the national stage, the Birmingham Campaign of 1963. Birmingham, Alabama, was not exactly known for its hospitality. In fact, it was more like the heavyweight champion of segregation, where racial discrimination was practically a city mascot. But the city, often jokingly referred to as Bombingham due to its frequent racially motivated bombings, was about to become the backdrop for one of the civil rights movement's most dramatic and pivotal battles. Enter Bull Connor, Birmingham's Commissioner of Public Safety, a man whose understanding of public relations was about as subtle as a bull in a china shop. Connor was a staunch segregationist, the kind of guy who thought maintaining racial order meant unleashing police dogs and high-pressure fire hoses on children. His tactics were not just over the top. They were downright medieval, and they were about to be broadcast to the world in a way that no PR makeover could ever undo. In the spring of 1963, King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, targeted Birmingham for a series of non-violent protests designed to confront the city's oppressive racial policies head-on. And by confront, I mean peacefully sit-ins and marches while being prepared to face the wrath of Bull Connor's goon squad. King's strategy was brilliantly simple: provoke a reaction so outrageous that it would force the nation to confront the brutal realities of segregation. And boy, did it work. The campaign began with a series of sit-ins at downtown lunch counters, followed by marches on City Hall. But when the adults were arrested faster than you could say Jim Crow, the movement took a daring turn. Enter the Children's Crusade, where hundreds of schoolchildren marched bravely into the jaws of Connor's brutality. Now, if you think sending children to face the wrath of fire hoses and snarling dogs sounds like a PR nightmare, you'd be right. Connor's over-the-top response was captured by news cameras and broadcast across the globe. The images were as shocking as they were powerful, children being blasted down the street by torrents of water, their small bodies tumbling like rag dolls. This was not a scene from a dystopian novel. It was the nightly news. The effect was electric. Suddenly, the civil rights movement had an audience of millions, and public opinion was shifting. Even President John F. Kennedy, who had previously been about as enthusiastic about civil rights as a cat in a swimming pool, was forced to take notice. The brutality of Connor's tactics, combined with the innocence of the young protesters, struck a chord with the American public and beyond. It was as if Connor had unwittingly handed King the megaphone he needed to amplify the call for justice. Economically, Birmingham was feeling the heat as well. The constant protests and negative publicity were not exactly enticing for businesses. With downtown commerce grinding to a halt and the city's reputation in tatters, local business leaders began to push for change, realizing that segregation was not just a moral issue, but a financial liability. Birmingham's economy was taking a hit, and the business community was starting to sweat. Meanwhile, King was arrested and penned his famous letter from Birmingham jail, a masterclass in persuasive writing that eloquently justified the necessity of direct action. King argued that waiting for justice was not an option when people were suffering now. His words were like a scalpel, cutting through the complacency of a nation that too often turned a blind eye to injustice. The letter circulated widely, adding intellectual weight to the moral and economic arguments for desegregation. As the campaign pressed on, the Kennedy administration, now with its hand somewhat forced, began drafting what would become the Civil Rights Act. The events in Birmingham had laid bare the need for federal intervention, and the tide was turning. Politicians who once sat on the fence were now scrambling to align themselves with the winds of change. But let's not sugarcoat this. The Birmingham campaign was no walk in the park. It was fraught with danger, and the risk of failure loomed large. The decision to involve children was controversial, even within the movement, and the potential for violence was high. Yet, the courage of those young marchers, combined with the strategic genius of King and his team, turned a local protest into a national movement that could no longer be ignored. In the aftermath of Birmingham, King's reputation soared. He was no longer just the leader of a regional protest. He was a national figure, a symbol of the struggle for civil rights. The campaign demonstrated the power of nonviolent resistance and the strategic use of media to effect social change. It was a pivotal moment, one that would set the stage for the monumental events still to come. Though the road ahead was still fraught with challenges, Birmingham had shown that courage and strategy could overcome even the most entrenched systems of oppression. King's leadership was now a beacon, guiding the movement forward with a renewed sense of purpose and urgency. And as we look toward the horizon, the next chapter in this unfolding drama promises to be just as compelling. Stay tuned, because the story of Martin Luther King Jr. and the fight for civil rights is far from over. As the Birmingham campaign's echoes faded into the annals of history, Martin Luther King Jr. and his cohort were already orchestrating their next grand symphony, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Picture this. It's 1963, and the nation is humming with the kind of tension you only find when a kettle is seconds from boiling over. The civil rights movement needed a stage big enough to hold the nation's attention, and what better place than the very steps of the Lincoln Memorial? Now, organizing a gathering of over 250,000 people in an era when communications involved rotary phones and snail mail is the kind of logistical challenge that would make even the most seasoned event planner break into a cold sweat. Forget about sending a group text or creating a Facebook event. This was grassroots mobilization on a scale that would make even today's digital influencers envious. The march required meticulous planning, drawing from a coalition of civil rights groups, labor unions, and religious organizations. Everyone from the NAACP to the United Auto Workers chipped in to make it happen. They orchestrated buses, trains, and even planes to transport throngs of people from all corners of the country to the nation's capital. The cost: a cool $250,000 in $1963, which would be roughly $2 million today. A hefty price tag for a day of peaceful protest, but absolutely priceless in terms of impact. And then there was the matter of accommodation. D.C. wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for this influx of activists. Many marchers were housed in churches, community centers, and even private homes. It was a logistical nightmare wrapped in a hospitality miracle, a testament to the sheer willpower and camaraderie that defined the movement. As the day dawned on August 28, 1963, the National Mall transformed into a sea of humanity. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of history in the making. It was like Woodstock for civil rights, minus the mud and tie-dye. People came with placards, songs, and an unyielding hope for change. And let's not forget the music. Mahalia Jackson, Joan Baez, and Bob Dylan lent their voices to the cause, reminding everyone that this was as much a cultural revolution as a political one. But let's get to the meat of the matter, the moment that will be etched into the American psyche forever. Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. Now, here's where we debunk some myths. The popular narrative suggests that King spontaneously delivered this masterpiece, as if he just woke up that morning and thought, "Hey, I'll wing it." In reality, King had been fine-tuning his speech for weeks, drawing inspiration from sermons and speeches he delivered in the past. It was a carefully crafted oration, designed to resonate like a symphony, yet delivered with the soul of a gospel preacher. However, the myth of spontaneity isn't entirely unfounded. As King stood before the massive crowd, he deviated from his prepared text. It was Mahalia Jackson, the gospel singer standing nearby, who reportedly called out to him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." And like a jazz musician riffing off a familiar tune, King improvised the most iconic part of his address, weaving together a vision of racial harmony that would echo across generations. That's the thing about King. He could turn a well-rehearsed speech into an impromptu masterpiece, blending preparation with inspiration as seamlessly as a DJ mixes tracks. The cultural impact of the march and King's speech was seismic. It was a moment that crystallized the civil rights movement in the public consciousness, putting pressure on Congress to act. Yet, while the nation was swept up in the romance of King's dream, the harsh reality was that the road to equality remained treacherous. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were still battles that lay ahead, requiring not just dreams but relentless political maneuvering. In the immediate aftermath, progress was a mixed bag. The march succeeded in creating a national dialogue about racial and economic injustice, but it also exposed rifts within the movement itself. Leaders like Malcolm X criticized the event, dubbing it the farce on Washington for its lack of militant urgency. He argued that the sanitized, government-approved nature of the march diluted its revolutionary potential. It was a reminder that even within the struggle for equality, there were differing visions of what liberation should look like. Economically, the march brought attention to the stark disparities faced by African Americans. King's message was not just about racial harmony, but also economic justice, a demand for jobs and fair wages in a system that treated black labor as disposable. The unemployment rate among African Americans was double that of whites, and the median income was a fraction of their white counterparts. These were not just statistics, they were the lived realities that King sought to transform. So, while the March on Washington was a colossal step forward, it was not the final chapter. The dream King articulated was a blueprint for a nation still grappling with its conscience. The marchers went home, but the struggle continued, in courtrooms, in classrooms, and in countless acts of quiet defiance across the country. As the dust settled, and the echoes of King's voice faded into the evening air, the nation was left to ponder its next steps. The march had been a moment of profound unity, but the path to justice was still paved with obstacles. The fight for civil rights was far from over, and the dream King spoke of was a call to action, not a proclamation of victory. Stay tuned, because the story of Martin Luther King Jr. and the movement he inspired is just heating up. There's more to come, and the road ahead promises to be as tumultuous as it is inspiring. And so, as the echoes of King's dream reverberated through American consciousness, we find ourselves shifting gears into the latter part of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, a time when his vision expanded beyond the immediate horizon of civil rights. The man who once captivated a nation with his dream was now wrestling with nightmares both domestic and abroad, taking public stands that were as divisive as they were daring. Enter the Vietnam War, a conflict that was devouring American lives and dollars like a ravenous beast, and one that King could no longer ignore. By 1967, the Vietnam War was costing the U.S. about $25 billion annually, and that's a lot of dough, even before adjusting for inflation. To put that in perspective, it was like burning through the GDP of a small country every year. King, who had long seen the connection between economic injustice and racial inequality, began to speak out against the war, linking it to the struggles of the poor and disenfranchised back home. In his famous Beyond Vietnam speech at Riverside Church, he called the U.S. government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Not exactly the kind of thing that wins you friends in high places, but King was never one to shy away from the uncomfortable truth. King's opposition to the Vietnam War wasn't just a moral stance, it was a strategic one. He argued that the war was siphoning resources away from the war on poverty, a domestic initiative that was already on life support. To King, every bomb dropped in Vietnam was a meal taken away from a starving child in America. He saw the war as a distraction from the urgent need to address economic inequality, a position that ruffled feathers even among his allies. Many civil rights leaders were wary of alienating President Lyndon B. Johnson, a key supporter of civil rights legislation. Talk about walking a tightrope over a pit of political vipers. This brings us to the Poor People's Campaign, King's ambitious attempt to unite the nation's economically downtrodden across racial lines. The campaign aimed to bring thousands of poor people to the nation's capital for a mass demonstration, demanding economic justice and a fair shot at the American dream. It was like the March on Washington's scrappy cousin, with a focus not just on civil rights, but on economic rights as well. King envisioned a multiracial army of the poor marching on Washington, not to beg for scraps, but to demand their rightful place at America's table. Unfortunately, the Poor People's Campaign was like trying to build a house of cards in a hurricane. The logistics were daunting, the funding scarce, and the political climate hostile. Yet King pressed on, driven by the belief that economic justice was the next frontier in the civil rights struggle. It was a bold move, and bold moves often come with harsh realities. While the campaign did eventually bring thousands to Washington, it was plagued by internal divisions and external opposition. The dream of economic equality proved to be as elusive as it was essential. And then, the unthinkable. On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, as he stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. He was there to support striking sanitation workers, a testament to his unwavering commitment to economic justice right up until the end. King was 39 years old, leaving behind a legacy that would be defined as much by his untimely death as by his life's work. The nation was plunged into a state of shock and mourning, cities erupted in riots, and the civil rights movement found itself at a crossroads. The economic impact of King's assassination was like throwing a wrench into a machine already struggling to function. Businesses closed, insurance claims skyrocketed, and the cost of rebuilding loomed large. Yet, the social cost was even greater. With King gone, the movement lost not just a leader, but a unifying force, a voice that could rise above the cacophony of division. The mythologizing of King began almost immediately as people grasped for a symbol of hope amidst the chaos. But here's the thing about myths. They have a way of smoothing over the wrinkles of reality. King was no saint, and his legacy is a complicated tapestry of triumphs and trials. While it's easy to enshrine him as a martyr for justice, it's crucial to remember that he was a man who faced fierce opposition, both from outside the movement and within. He was criticized for being too radical, too moderate, too everything, and not enough at the same time. The romanticized image of King as a dreamer belies the gritty truth of his relentless struggle against systemic oppression. He was a man who battled not just against racial injustice, but against poverty and militarism, often at great personal and political cost. Despite the myth-making, King's legacy endures not because he was perfect, but because he was persistent. He laid the groundwork for future generations to continue the fight, and his dream remains a rallying cry for those who dare to believe in a more just world. Yet, the struggle for civil rights is far from over. The issues King championed, racial equality, economic justice, and peace, are still very much in play today. The road to justice is long and winding, filled with potholes of apathy and barriers of inequality, but it's a road worth traveling. So, as we wrap up our journey through the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., let's remember that the work of building a just society is never done. King's dream was not a destination, but a direction, a call to action that resonates as urgently today as it did in the 1960s. The torch has been passed, and it's up to us to keep the flame burning. Because in the end, the dream of equality isn't just King's, it's ours, and it's a dream worth fighting for. The drafty corridors of a medieval castle might not scream luxury living today, but back in the day, they were the height of both security and style. Picture a massive stone fortress looming on the horizon, its walls thick enough to withstand a siege and tall enough to intimidate any would-be invader. These weren't just homes. They were statements of power, wealth, and let's be honest, a bit of paranoia too. You had to keep the marauding hordes out somehow, right? Now, let's talk moats. Not just for dramatic effect, these water-filled ditches were the medieval version of a no-trespassing sign, only instead of just ignoring it, you'd drown if you tried to cross it without an invite. Moats could be up to 30 feet wide and 12 feet deep, and were often filled with more than just water. We're talking mud, brambles, and maybe a few less than friendly critters lurking beneath the surface. So, swim in the moat wasn't exactly a leisure activity. Inside the castle, the layout was a masterclass in medieval efficiency and, quite frankly, a logistical nightmare. The Great Hall was the heart of the operation, a multipurpose space where business deals were struck, justice was meted out, and yes, feasts were occasionally held. But forget about the romantic notion of endless banquets. For most of the year, meals consisted of bread, porridge, and if you were lucky, a bit of meat. And let's not even start on the sanitation, or lack thereof. The garderobe, Medieval Europe's answer to the bathroom was essentially a hole in the wall leading to the outside world, proving once and for all that indoor plumbing was a dream yet to come. The castle's design wasn't just about keeping people out, it was also about keeping a lot of people in. Lords, ladies, knights, servants, and the Ard court jester all called these stone fortresses home. But life inside wasn't all about jousting tournaments and courtly love. For the majority, it was a grind of daily chores, from tending fires to managing the pantry. And let's not forget the ever-present task of maintaining those towering walls, which could be up to 12 feet thick, and required constant upkeep to fend off decay and enemy attacks alike. Speaking of attacks, let's bust a myth. The dreaded murder holes. These cleverly designed apertures in the ceilings above gateways were not, as you might imagine, used to drop boiling oil on unsuspecting invaders. Oil was far too precious and expensive to waste, so defenders typically opted for less costly projectiles like rocks or arrows. Still, if you were on the receiving end, it probably felt like murder. But why build these massive stone monsters in the first place? Besides the obvious need for security, castles were a way to show off, a sort of medieval Instagram post declaring, "Look at what I've got." Building one was a monumental task that could take decades and the equivalent of millions of dollars today. They were strategically placed to control important trade routes or to guard against restless neighbors. For example, the construction of Dover Castle, one of the largest in England, began in the 12th century and was positioned to defend against invasions from across the Channel. Yet for all their grandeur, castles were far from cozy. The stone walls that offered protection were also excellent at trapping the cold. Fireplaces did their best to combat the chill, but they were often more smoke than heat. And while we might romanticize the idea of a roaring fire, the reality was often a smoky room with little actual warmth. As for lighting, forget about abundant sunshine filtering through large windows. Most windows were narrow slits designed to keep projectiles out, not let light in. So, why did people flock to these fortresses? Security, yes, but also the promise of a better life compared to the uncertain safety of open countryside. Within the walls, a certain order prevailed, and for those who served the lord of the castle, there was the hope of advancement, or, at the very least, a steady meal. It was a world governed by strict hierarchies, where social mobility was as limited as the castle's drafty corridors were long. In the end, castles were a paradox. They symbolized power and protection while simultaneously representing the harsh realities of medieval life. They were fortresses, homes, and seats of government, all rolled into one. And while they might not have offered the creature comforts we take for granted today, they were the beating heart of medieval society, a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder of a time when life was as precarious as it was mesmerizing. While castles stood as mighty symbols of medieval might, they were also bustling hubs of human activity, housing everyone from the lord and lady to the lowliest of scullery maids. Let's dive headfirst into this medieval microcosm and meet the cast of characters who ran the show, or at least tried to, amidst the drafty chaos. At the top of the totem pole sat the lord, a title that came with more than just a fancy chair at the feast. The lord was the king's man on the ground, the big kahuna overseeing the vast lands and the people who worked them. His job, to maintain order, enforce laws, and ensure the king's coffers were jingling with taxes. Picture a feudal CEO, only instead of quarterly reports, he dealt in land grants and military service. These land grants were the medieval equivalent of LinkedIn endorsements, a bit of real estate, as a thank you for loyalty and service. Talk about a perk package. Beside the lord was the lady of the castle, a role that was no walk in the rose garden. This was a woman who wielded power in the domestic sphere, running the household with an iron fist in a velvet glove. She managed the staff, oversaw the education of young noblewomen, and handled the castle's finances, all while maintaining the social graces expected of her station. If multitasking were an Olympic sport, these ladies would have taken home the gold. Speaking of multitasking, let's not forget the knights. These armored warriors were the medieval equivalent of special forces, owing military service in exchange for land. When not off jousting or crusading, knights played a key role in managing the lord's land and keeping a watchful eye over the castle's defenses. But don't be fooled by the chivalric code. These guys were more about swords and strategy than poetry and courtly love. Below the knights, the hierarchy expanded like a medieval org chart, with a cast of characters, each playing their part in the castle's daily drama. The steward, or seneschal, was the lord's right-hand man, managing the estate's day-to-day operations and ensuring the lord's interests were protected. Picture him as the medieval COO, balancing the books and keeping the castle's gears turning smoothly. Then there were the chambermaids, whose tireless efforts kept the wheels of domestic life in motion. These unsung heroes scrubbed, swept, and served with little recognition. They were the engine room of the castle's domestic machine, and while their work was tough, it was a step up from the grueling life of a peasant outside the walls. Job security. Let's just say it was as stable as the next harvest. If the Lord's favor shifted, or the castle fell on hard times, staff could find themselves out of a job faster than you could say serfdom. And let's not overlook the kitchen staff, led by the cook, who was charged with the Herculean task of feeding the entire castle. This was no simple feat, given the limited ingredients and primitive cooking methods of the time. Yet, they managed to whip up meals that kept the castle humming, even if the menu rarely included the sumptuous feasts of legend. Now, onto the often romanticized role of the minstrel or court jester, whose job was to entertain and occasionally offer biting social commentary wrapped in humor. A kind of medieval stand-up comedian. These figures had the precarious task of keeping the court amused without crossing the fine line into offense. If they succeeded, they were rewarded with patronage. If not, well, let's just say their career prospects could take a rapid nosedive. Moving further down the social ladder, we find the peasants and villeins who worked the land. While they didn't live within the castle walls, their labor was the backbone of the entire feudal system. In exchange for protection and a plot of land to cultivate, they owed their lord a portion of their harvest and a few days' labor each year. It was a life of backbreaking work and little reward, but it beat the alternative, starvation or banditry in the dangerous medieval countryside. The feudal system, with its rigid structure, was like a medieval LinkedIn. But instead of networking with a cup of artisanal coffee, you were more likely to be trading favors for land or military support. Everyone knew their place in this societal pyramid, and stepping out of line could mean losing everything. Titles and roles were inherited more often than earned, making social mobility about as likely as finding a unicorn in the castle moat. However, for all its rigidity, the feudal system had a certain pragmatic charm. It was a network of mutual obligations that, when it worked, provided a semblance of order and stability in a world where chaos was never far away. Lords needed vassals to defend their lands, and vassals needed lords to grant them land and protection. It was a symbiotic relationship that allowed these massive stone ecosystems to function, most of the time. While the romantic image of medieval life often focuses on knights in shining armor and damsels in distress, the reality was more about hard work, strict hierarchies, and a constant juggle of duties and responsibilities. The castles were less fairy tale and more soap opera, with a cast of characters each striving for survival and a better place within the stone walls. And as we continue our journey through this medieval world, let's not forget these unsung heroes who kept the castle running. From the lord at the helm to the chambermaids in the shadows, each played their part in a story that was as much about power and ambition as it was about endurance and survival. And speaking of survival, let's dive into the delicate dance of social etiquette that kept the medieval castle from descending into chaos. Picture a world where knowing which fork to use isn't just a dinner party faux pas, but a potential diplomatic incident. Welcome to the world of medieval nobles, where social circles were navigated with the precision of a chess game, and one false move could be relegated to the social purgatory of a windowless tower chamber. First off, let's tackle the medieval version of Tinder, arranged marriages. Forget swiping right. This was all about strategic alliances and merging family fortunes. Your love life wasn't just your business. It was a matter of family honor and economic gain. Marriages were arranged as early as infancy, contracts sealed tighter than a knight's armor. By the time you hit your teens, you might find yourself hitched to someone you met the day of your wedding. Romantic, maybe not, but effective, absolutely. These unions were the glue holding the feudal system together, ensuring land and power stayed within the family, and occasionally turning enemies into allies faster than you could say, "I do." Now, once you're hitched, it's time to familiarize yourself with the art of banquet etiquette, where the stakes were as high as the towers you dined in. A medieval feast was less about the food, though a roasted peacock could be a showstopper, and more about the social maneuvering. Seating arrangements were a strategic puzzle, with the lord and lady presiding over the high table, while lesser nobles jockeyed for proximity and favor. You'd better know your place, because sitting in the wrong seat could lead to a scandal bigger than a misplaced trencher of gravy. And speaking of trenchers, let's talk table manners. The medieval dining experience was a hands-on affair, and I do mean hands. No forks here, folks. Those wouldn't gain popularity until the Renaissance. Instead, diners used knives and their fingers, with bread trenchers acting as edible plates. The trick was to keep your fingers clean and your elbows off the table, lest you be judged a boorish clod. Napkins. Try a slice of bread or your sleeve. It was a test of dexterity and decorum, where even a crumb out of place could ruin your reputation faster than a runaway pig in the courtyard. But if you thought dining was a minefield, wait until you hear about fashion. Medieval nobles took their sartorial cues from the latest trends, think pointy shoes and sumptuary laws dictating who could wear what. Heaven forbid you wear ermine if you didn't have the title to back it up. This was fashion as a status symbol, a visual hierarchy where the length of your cloak or the width of your sleeves broadcast your position in the social order. And let's not forget the colors. Woe betide the commoner caught in royal purple. Speaking of faux pas, hygiene was a whole different ball game. Modern noses might recoil at the thought, but medieval hygiene was less about daily showers and more about strategic scrubbing. Bathing was a communal affair, and while the wealthy had the luxury of private tubs, sometimes even scented with rose petals, the average Joe relied on rivers or communal bathhouses. Hot water was a luxury, and the idea of daily washing was on par with witchcraft. To combat the inevitable odors, herbs and perfumes were the medieval equivalent of deodorant, masking rather than eradicating the less-than-pleasant aromas. But etiquette wasn't just about appearances. It was also about diplomacy. The art of passive-aggressive communication was perfected in these stone fortresses, where every word was laden with potential pitfalls. Insulting someone was a high-stakes game, as was the art of the veiled compliment. A well-placed quip could elevate your standing or ruin your political career before you could say chivalry. This was a world where what you didn't say was just as important as what you did, and nobles navigated these treacherous waters with all the subtlety of a castle siege. And then there's the courtly love, a concept that has spawned countless tales of knights and their unattainable ladies. In reality, it was more about social posturing than actual romance. The ideals of courtly love were often a safe outlet for the frustrations of arranged marriages, a way for nobles to engage in romantic dalliances without threatening the political alliances those marriages represented. True love was a luxury few could afford, and while troubadours sang of passion and longing, the reality was often more about politics and propriety than genuine affection. All of this social maneuvering was bound by the rigid structures of the feudal system, where everyone had a role to play and stepping outside your designated part could lead to social exile. It was a world where the personal was political, and every gesture, every word was loaded with meaning. So, as we wander through these stone corridors, let's remember that behind the romance of the medieval castle was a complex web of social obligations and cultural quirks that kept the whole enterprise from crumbling like a poorly baked trencher. As we continue our journey through the castle's social labyrinth, we begin to see that these cultural intricacies weren't just quaint quirks of a bygone era. They were essential survival strategies in a world where power was as precarious as a jester's tightrope walk. So stay tuned, because there's plenty more medieval magic and mayhem to uncover within these drafty walls. Now, speaking of medieval magic and mayhem, let's talk about the economic machinery that kept these colossal castles from becoming nothing more than oversized stone mausoleums. You see, a castle wasn't a static pile of rocks. It was a living, breathing beast, demanding a constant influx of resources to keep its metaphorical heart beating. And just like any other beast, needed feeding, a task that required a complex web of taxes, tithes, and trade that would make even the most seasoned accountant break into a cold sweat. First up on our medieval economic tour is the tax system, a marvel of ingenuity or perhaps sadism, depending on which side of the coin you were on. The lord of the castle, acting as the king's regional tax collector, had to ensure the royal coffers were filled. This wasn't just a duty, it was a matter of survival. Fail to meet the king's expectations, and your head could roll faster than a barrel down a hill. Taxes were levied on everything from land and produce to goods sold at market, and they weren't just collected in cash. Livestock, grain, and even labor could substitute for cold, hard coin. Let's not forget the tithe, the church's cut of the medieval pie. A hefty 10% of everyone's income, not just in cash, but also in goods, went to support the local parish. For peasants, this was like being asked to donate your Netflix subscription and half your groceries to the church every month. The church wielded enormous power, and failing to pay your dues could earn you a one-way ticket to the fiery depths of hell, or at least, that was the threat. It was a system that blended spiritual obligation with financial extortion in a way that would make any modern televangelist green with envy. Now, onto trade, the lifeblood of any medieval economy. Castles were often situated at strategic points along trade routes, doubling as toll booths in a pre-Easy Pass era. This wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was a deliberate strategy. Controlling trade routes meant controlling the flow of money, goods, and information. A well-placed castle could rake in tolls from merchants passing through, a lucrative side hustle that provided much-needed income to fund the lord's lavish lifestyle and the constant repairs those stout walls demanded. And speaking of repairs, maintaining a castle was an expensive affair, akin to owning a fleet of luxury yachts. Take the example of Caernarfon Castle in Wales, whose construction began in 1283. By the 1290, its maintenance costs were equivalent to millions in today's currency. Those grand stone walls didn't just erect themselves, and keeping them standing required an army of masons, carpenters, and laborers. This wasn't just a once-in-a-lifetime investment, it was an ongoing financial drain. Repairs could bankrupt a lord faster than a gambling habit. The economic burden didn't stop with the lord. The entire feudal system was a delicate balance of give and take, with peasants at the bottom holding up the whole operation. These folks were the worker bees of the medieval world, laboring under the weight of taxes and tithes while still needing to feed their families. Their toil produced the food that fed the castle's inhabitants and the goods that filled its coffers. It was a system that relied on the backs of the many to support the luxuries of the few. But let's not forget the appeal of the system. For all its inequities, the feudal economy provided a semblance of order in a world teetering on the edge of chaos. Lords offered protection and a sense of stability, something worth its weight in gold during tumultuous times. In exchange, peasants knew their place and what was expected of them. A deal that, while harsh, was preferable to the uncertainties of life outside the castle's protective embrace. And while we're on the subject of embrace, let's give a nod to the merchants and craftsmen who thrived in this system. The castle market, held in the shadow of those imposing walls, was a bustling hub of commerce. Here, one could find everything from fine fabrics and spices to the latest in medieval weaponry. These markets were the medieval equivalent of Amazon, offering a taste of the exotic and the essential. They played a vital role in the castle's economy, drawing in traders and craftsmen who paid fees for the privilege of setting up shop. Craftsmen, in particular, were crucial cogs in the castle's economic machine. Blacksmiths, carpenters, and masons were in constant demand, their skills essential for both defense and daily life. They were the original gig workers, plying their trade in exchange for a place within the castle's protective walls and a share of its resources. For them, the castle offered opportunity, a chance to ply their trade and perhaps climb the social ladder, one forged horseshoe at a time. But let's not romanticize this too much. The economic system that kept these castles running was as unforgiving as it was intricate. There was little room for error, and a bad harvest or a failed trade endeavor could spell disaster. It was a high-stakes game with plenty of losers, as many a bankrupt lord could attest. So, while we admire the grandeur of these stone fortresses, let's not forget the economic engine that kept them alive. It was a world of complex transactions and shrewd negotiations, where wealth and power were as much about strategic placement and political savvy as they were about brute force. The castles were not just symbols of military might. They were the beating hearts of medieval economies, fueling the ambitions and livelihoods of those within their shadowy embrace. And as we continue our exploration of these architectural marvels, let's remember that beneath their imposing facades lay a complicated web of economic and social relationships that sustained them. The castles were more than just cold stone and defensive battlements. They were vibrant centers of life, bustling with the energy of the medieval world. Stay tuned, because the story of these economic powerhouses is far from over. There's plenty more to uncover as we delve deeper into the mysteries and machinations that kept these stone giants standing tall against the tides of time. And so, as we stand on the precipice of the Renaissance, watching the sun set on the medieval era, we must ask, what happened to these mighty stone beasts, the castles that once stood as the ultimate expression of power and prestige? Well, spoiler alert, they got outclassed by a little something called gunpowder. Yep, the very thing that makes your 4th of July extra festive was a total game-changer back in the day. You see, the invention of gunpowder and the rise of cannons in the 14th and 15th centuries meant that those towering walls, once impervious to arrows and catapults, were suddenly about as useful as a chocolate teapot in a heatwave. A cannonball could punch through stone like a hot knife through butter, rendering all those meticulously crafted murder holes and arrow slits a bit redundant. And if you think a moat could help, well, think again. Water doesn't do much against a cannonball except provide a nice splash for dramatic effect. Take the fall of Constantinople in 1453, for instance. The mighty Theodosian walls, which had withstood sieges for over a millennium, crumbled under the relentless bombardment of Ottoman cannons. It was a wake-up call for Europe, signaling the end of an era where stone fortresses ruled supreme. Suddenly, the medieval castle found itself on the wrong side of history, like a blockbuster store in the age of Netflix. But it wasn't just the artillery that sounded the death knell for castles. The winds of political change were blowing across Europe, and they were as relentless as a gale in the English Channel. The rise of centralized nation-states meant that power began to concentrate in the hands of kings and emperors rather than local lords. Monarchs like Louis Roman XI of France and Henry Roman VII of England were not keen on sharing power with a bunch of feudal barons holed up in their impregnable stone sanctuaries. They preferred the idea of a centralized army and the kind of fortified towns that could double as administrative centers, not just defensive bastions. And let's not forget the economic shifts. The late Middle Ages saw the rise of a money-based economy and a burgeoning merchant class that could fund armies more efficiently than a feudal levy ever could. Why spend decades building a castle when you could hire a mercenary army to do your bidding, or better yet, construct a modern fortress with angled bastions designed to deflect cannon fire? It was a bit like upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone. Once you've experienced the benefits, there's no going back. But while castles fell out of military fashion, they didn't vanish overnight. They lingered on as symbols of nostalgia and status, much like those vintage cars you see at classic car shows. Wealthy nobles and monarchs transformed them into palatial homes, stripping them of their utilitarian features in favor of Renaissance elegance. Think less Game of Thrones and more Downton Abbey, but with a few extra tapestries. Ironically, the very things that made castles obsolete, gunpowder, centralized power, economic changes, also fueled the romanticism that surrounds them today. We look back on these stone fortresses with a sort of wistful longing, imagining knights in shining armor and damsels in distress, conveniently ignoring the drafty halls and questionable hygiene. It's a bit like pining for the good old days of dial-up internet, forgetting the endless wait for a single web page to load. And as we gaze upon these ancient ruins today, they remind us of a time when the world was very different, a time when the local lord was both protector and tax collector, and the feudal system was the backbone of society. Castles were more than just fortifications. They were microcosms of medieval life, embodying the hopes, fears, and ambitions of those who lived within their shadow. In the grand tapestry of history, castles were the threads that held the medieval world together. They shaped the landscape, dictated the flow of trade, and stood as the ultimate status symbol, a physical manifestation of power and prestige. Yet they also remind us of the impermanence of human achievement. No matter how formidable, all things must eventually bow to the inexorable march of progress. So, as you wander through a crumbling ruin or marvel at a restored masterpiece, remember that these castles are more than just relics of the past. They are monuments to human ingenuity and adaptability, testaments to the resilience of societies in the face of change. They tell the story of a world that was as complex and contradictory as our own, a world where romance and reality were woven together in a tapestry as intricate as the stonework of any grand fortress. In the end, while castles may no longer serve as the military bastions they once were, they continue to capture our imagination, reminding us that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a living, breathing narrative that still shapes our world today. So next time you find yourself staring at the jagged silhouette of a castle against the horizon, take a moment to appreciate the legacy it represents, a legacy of power, ambition, and the enduring human spirit. And who knows, you might just feel a little bit of that medieval magic yourself. Isaac Newton's arrival into the world in 1642 was about as subtle as a thunderstorm in a teacup. Picture a tiny village called Woolsthorpe, England, where the most exciting event was probably sheep deciding to graze on the wrong hill. Born on Christmas Day, Newton was a premature baby, so small it was said he could fit inside a quart mug. It's a miracle he survived at all, let alone went on to redefine the universe. His father, also named Isaac, had died 3 months before his birth, leaving baby Newton without a father figure and his mother, Hannah, to juggle grief and a newborn in a time when infant mortality rates were as high as 50%. Hannah remarried when Newton was 3, and rather than play the doting mother, she decided to leave little Isaac with his grandmother while she moved in with her new husband. The snub must have stung like 100 bee stings, and Newton never quite forgave her for it. This familial drama brewed like a storm cloud over his early years, fueling a fiery temper that would have made even the most patient nanny consider early retirement. Fast forward to his school days, and young Isaac was about as interested in social activities as a cat is in swimming. His classmates might as well have been invisible, as his main competition was a windmill he built himself. Forget sports or poetry. Newton's heart was set on engineering feats. He constructed a working model powered by a mouse on a treadmill, a prototype that was probably more mechanically sound than anything his peers could muster. Who needs friends when you've got Rodentron machinery? This isn't to say Newton was always the top of his class. In fact, he was often preoccupied with scribbling ideas and experiments that had nothing to do with his lessons, leading to a report card that likely had more red ink than a revolution. But this obsession with understanding things on his own terms was precisely what set him apart. He was the kind of student who would question the very foundations of his education system, just for fun. By 1661, Newton was on his way to Cambridge University, where he was supposed to train for a life in the church. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. Instead, Newton used his time at Cambridge to dive headfirst into the world of mathematics and natural philosophy. He was a bit like a kid in a candy store, except the candy was calculus, and the store was a library filled with ideas that would make most people's heads spin. Then came 1665, the year the Great Plague decided to turn England into an episode of Survivor, with far too many contestants. While London and its inhabitants were dropping like flies, Cambridge sensibly shut its doors, sending students home to avoid the infectious chaos. Newton returned to Woolsthorpe, where one of the most famous eureka moments in history was about to unfold. With nothing but time on his hands and a head full of questions, Newton embarked on a 2-year period of intense study that would later be dubbed his Annus Mirabilis, or Year of Miracles. Let's be real, quarantines aren't typically associated with great productivity. Most of us would spend the time binge-watching questionable TV shows and eating our weight in snacks. But Newton, he was busy laying the groundwork for calculus, formulating the laws of motion, and contemplating gravity. Rumor has it, thanks to a strategically placed apple tree. While the apple story is mostly myth, it does capture the essence of Newton's genius, the ability to see the extraordinary in the mundane. Newton's time in isolation was less about divine inspiration and more about sheer intellectual grit. His discoveries during this period would later form the backbone of his seminal work, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, published in 1687. This wasn't just a book. It was a game-changer, a tome that laid the foundations of classical mechanics, effectively turning the scientific world on its head. So, there you have it. The early life of Isaac Newton, a tale of family drama, prodigious talent, and a touch of plague panic that set him on the path to becoming one of the most influential figures in scientific history. The legend of Newton is as much about the struggles and the setbacks as it is about the triumphs and the breakthroughs. And while the apple might not have actually bonked him on the head, there's no denying that his insights have left an indelible mark on how we understand the universe. And so, Newton's tale of isolation and intellectual fireworks was just the prelude to his next chapter at Cambridge, a place that preferred its geniuses to be both seen and not heard, especially if they were concocting revolutionary mathematics in the back of a dusty study. As Newton returned to the hallowed halls of academia, the vibe was less Animal House and more Hermit Shack. If parties at Cambridge were the social Olympics, Newton was the guy who didn't even bother to show up for the qualifiers. To say that Newton was a recluse would be like calling the ocean damp. At Cambridge, he was less interested in the social scene and more fascinated by the arcane mysteries of mathematics and natural philosophy. This was a time when calculus was still a fledgling idea, barely out of its mathematical crib. Newton, in his own enigmatic way, turned it into a personal laboratory project, scribbling formulas that would eventually shake the foundations of mathematics. Forget sharing his work with the world. Newton was content to let calculus simmer on his mental back burner. He didn't even bother publishing it until later, letting his notes gather dust like the world's most valuable collection of post-its. The infamous Apple incident, often portrayed as the eureka moment of gravity enlightenment, is a classic case of myth overshadowing reality. The romanticized image of Newton being bonked on the head by a rogue apple is more fiction than fact. Yet, it does capture the spirit of his innovative thinking, seeing connections where others saw only falling fruit. In truth, Newton's ideas about gravity were less about spontaneous fruit-related insights and more about years of rigorous study and contemplation. Now, let's talk about the peculiar 17th century backdrop. It was a period when alchemy and physics were not as distinct as we'd like to think. The same scholars who were dissecting the laws of motion were also trying to transmute lead into gold, which sounds a bit like trying to turn a potato into a smartphone. Yet, this blend of science and mysticism was the norm, not the exception. Alchemy was all the rage, a curious mix of chemistry, philosophy, and the occasional bit of magic. Even Newton got caught up in the alchemical fever, spending countless hours on experiments that often produced more smoke than gold. Newton's fascination with alchemy wasn't just a quirky side gig. It was part of a broader intellectual context where the line between science and sorcery was as blurry as a foggy London morning. In those days, alchemy was considered a legitimate scientific pursuit, attracting some of the brightest minds of the era. Newton's notebooks were filled with cryptic alchemical symbols and recipes, a testament to his tireless quest for understanding the universe in all its mysterious glory. But why, you might ask, Newton so secretive about his groundbreaking work on calculus? Well, in the cutthroat world of 17th century academia, sharing your discoveries was like handing your rival the keys to your intellectual kingdom. Newton was notoriously wary of criticism and preferred to keep his mathematical cards close to his chest. He wasn't exactly a fan of peer review, which, let's face it, can be as brutal as a pack of wolves in a meat market. It wasn't until Leibniz, another mathematical heavyweight, came along and independently developed calculus that Newton's work started to see the light of day. Cue the epic intellectual showdown, complete with accusations of plagiarism and enough academic drama to fill a soap opera. Meanwhile, the scientific community of the time was a vibrant tapestry woven with both rational inquiry and mystical exploration. Figures like Robert Boyle were laying the groundwork for modern chemistry, while others dabbled in the esoteric. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, was a hotbed of scientific activity, a place where ideas collided and knowledge expanded. Newton eventually joined this illustrious group, contributing to a new era of scientific discovery and debate. It was here that he would eventually present his findings on gravity, motion, and the very fabric of the cosmos. The 17th century was a time when the thirst for knowledge was as insatiable as a marathon runner at a water station. While the bubonic plague and political upheaval threatened to derail progress, the era's thinkers were undeterred. They forged ahead, driven by curiosity and a desire to unravel the mysteries of the natural world. Newton was at the forefront of this intellectual revolution, a solitary genius in a world teetering on the brink of modernity. In this whirlwind of ideas, Newton's calculus was a silent revolution, changing the landscape of mathematics without fanfare or fireworks. It was the mathematical equivalent of a stealth bomber, quiet, powerful, and virtually undetectable until it struck. Despite his reluctance to share, Newton's work would eventually form the backbone of scientific advancement, influencing fields as diverse as engineering, economics, and physics. As we leave Newton at this point in his journey, tucked away in his Cambridge sanctuary, it's clear that his legacy was as much about what he chose to reveal as what he kept hidden. His time at Cambridge was a crucible for innovation, a period of intense intellectual fire that would illuminate the path of science for centuries to come. And while the apple might not have been the catalyst it's often cracked up to be, Newton's genius was undeniable, a force of nature that continues to shape our understanding of the universe. So, just as Newton was settling into his role as the ultimate academic recluse, the universe decided to shake things up. Picture the year 1696, when Newton was plucked from his cozy Cambridge cocoon and thrust into the gritty, grimy world of the Royal Mint. Now, this wasn't your average career change. We're talking about a man who was more accustomed to pondering the mysteries of the cosmos, being asked to tackle the very earthly problem of counterfeit currency. At the time, England's economy was a mess, and counterfeiting was as rampant as squirrels in a park. The coins in circulation were as trustworthy as a used car salesman with a suspiciously low price. The problem was so severe that it threatened to derail the entire nation's economy. Enter Isaac Newton, who swapped his telescope for a magnifying glass and became what can only be described as a 17th-century detective. Forget CSI. London. This was Newton, mint investigator. Newton's job was to oversee the recoinage of England's currency, a mammoth task that involved melting down old coins and minting new ones. But his role quickly evolved into something more akin to crime fighting than coin minting. The Royal Mint was his new laboratory, and counterfeiters were the unknowing subjects of his latest experiment in justice. In true Newton fashion, he approached the task with methodical precision, leveraging his analytical skills to hunt down counterfeiters with the zeal of a modern-day Sherlock Holmes. One of his most notorious adversaries was William Challoner, a criminal mastermind who had turned counterfeiting into an art form. Challoner was the kind of guy who would have thrived in any era, with a knack for deception that would make a carnival huckster blush. He was so brazen that he even petitioned Parliament to reform the mint, all while running his own illicit operations on the side. Talk about audacity. But Challoner made a crucial mistake. He underestimated Newton. You see, Newton's mind was a finely tuned machine, capable of seeing patterns where others saw chaos. His approach to solving the counterfeiting problem was nothing short of methodical genius. He set up a network of informants, collected evidence, and meticulously documented every step of his investigation. If Challoner thought he could outsmart Newton, he was in for a rude awakening. Newton's investigations led him into the seedy underbelly of London, a place where the line between criminal and civilian was as thin as a shilling. He wasn't just dealing with counterfeiters. He was navigating a world rife with bribery, corruption, and deception. It was a far cry from the ivory towers of academia, but Newton adapted with the tenacity of a pit bull at a steakhouse. His pursuit of justice was relentless, and he didn't rest until Challoner was brought to trial. The trial of William Challoner was a spectacle in itself, a courtroom drama that captivated the public's imagination. Challoner, ever the showman, attempted to defend himself with the skill of a seasoned barrister. But Newton's meticulous preparation was his undoing. Armed with a mountain of evidence and the tenacity of a dog with a bone, Newton laid out the case with precision. Challoner was found guilty and sentenced to death, a grim reminder of what happens when you underestimate a mind like Newton's. Beyond the courtroom drama, Newton's time at the Mint had far-reaching implications. The recoinage he oversaw helped stabilize the economy, a crucial step in England's path toward becoming a financial powerhouse. His efforts to curb counterfeiting were instrumental in restoring public confidence in the currency, a task that was as much about psychology as it was about economics. In a world where trust was as rare as a unicorn, Newton's work at the Mint was nothing short of transformative. But let's not romanticize Newton's tenure at the Mint too much. It wasn't all courtroom victories and economic triumphs. Reality was a constant battle against a tide of criminal ingenuity and bureaucratic inertia. Newton's work was painstaking and often thankless, a far cry from the intellectual pursuits that had defined his earlier career. Yet, in typical Newtonian fashion, he tackled these challenges with the same relentless curiosity that had driven his scientific discoveries. So, while Newton's time at the Royal Mint might lack the romantic allure of falling apples and celestial theories, it was a pivotal chapter in his life. It showcased his adaptability and his willingness to apply his prodigious intellect to the gritty realities of economic and social chaos. It was a testament to his ability to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be, given the right combination of intellect and determination. As we leave Newton in the midst of his crime-fighting endeavors at the Royal Mint, it's clear that this chapter of his life was as much about the pursuit of justice as it was about the pursuit of knowledge. It was a time when Newton, the solitary genius, became Newton, the relentless detective, reshaping the world in ways both visible and invisible. And as he continued to navigate the treacherous waters of 17th-century England, one thing was certain. Newton's story was far from over, with plenty more twists and turns yet to come. As Newton's tale of detective work at the Royal Mint unfolds, it becomes clear that his talents were as versatile as a Swiss Army knife in a survival kit. But just as the ink of justice dried on the Challoner case, Newton found himself embroiled in another kind of war, one waged not with counterfeit coins, but with cutting-edge calculus. Enter the infamous feud with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a mathematical clash so epic it could have made for a blockbuster courtroom drama. This was the 17th-century version of a Twitter spat, only with more wigs and fewer hashtags. Now, before we dive into the mudslinging, let's set the stage. Both Newton and Leibniz made groundbreaking contributions to calculus, that magical branch of mathematics that explains everything from planetary orbits to the way your coffee cup cools on a winter morning. The problem: both claim they got there first. Cue the academic politics, replete with pamphlet wars that would put modern-day PR campaigns to shame. Newton, ever the recluse, initially kept his derivations tucked away like a secret family recipe. Meanwhile, Leibniz published his work in 1684, 2 years before Newton's Principia, setting off alarm bells in the corridors of Cambridge. The Royal Society, a bastion of scientific inquiry, and let's face it, gossip, was soon abuzz with accusations of intellectual theft. This was no mere academic disagreement. It was a battle for the very soul of mathematical innovation. The calculus controversy wasn't just about who was right, it was about who would shape the narrative of mathematical progress. Newton, despite his disdain for public life, found himself thrust into the role of both scientist and spin doctor. This was an uncomfortable spotlight for someone who'd rather be tinkering with telescopes than trading barbs in pamphlets. Yet, the stakes were too high, and the preservation of his legacy became an obsession. Newton's strategy was as calculated as one of his equations. He marshaled his allies within the Royal Society to champion his cause, painting Leibniz as a copycat who had taken a peek at Newton's homework. The Society even published a report in 1712, humorously titled Commercium Epistolicum, which concluded that Leibniz had indeed seen Newton's work before developing his own. Let's just say, if there were a Nobel Prize for passive-aggressive academic papers, this one would have been a shoo-in. Ironically, Newton's drive to protect his legacy stood in stark contrast to his aversion to the limelight. He was like a rock star who hated performing live, but couldn't resist the allure of a record-breaking album. His obsession with cementing his place in history was so intense it bordered on the theatrical. Yet, despite the pamphlet drama and academic politicking, Newton's mathematical contributions were undeniable. His work laid the groundwork for centuries of scientific advancement, even if his methods of ensuring credit were, shall we say, less than subtle. Now, let's dig a little deeper into Newton's quirks, those delightful eccentricities that make him more than just the sum of his scientific achievements. You see, Newton was a man of contradictions. While he was busy revolutionizing physics, he was also knee-deep in alchemy, that curious blend of pseudoscience and mysticism. Forget Hogwarts. Newton's study was the original chamber of secrets, filled with cryptic symbols and recipes for turning dross into gold. Alchemy wasn't just a hobby for Newton. It was an intellectual pursuit that consumed as much of his time as his more respectable scientific endeavors. He saw alchemy as a way to uncover the hidden truths of the universe, to pierce the veil of the material world and glimpse the divine machinery behind it. To modern eyes, this might seem a bit like searching for the fountain of youth in a fitness magazine, but in Newton's time, alchemy was a legitimate field of study. His notebooks brimmed with alchemical musings, a testament to his restless curiosity and unyielding quest for knowledge. But wait, there's more. Newton's fascination with biblical chronology. Yes, the father of modern physics spent a considerable chunk of his later years trying to decode the Bible as if it were a cosmic crossword puzzle. He calculated the date of creation as 4004 BC, a figure that was as precise as it was controversial. This endeavor was less about religious fervor and more about Newton's belief that the divine order of the universe was reflected in both scripture and nature. For Newton, science and faith weren't opposing forces. They were two sides of the same coin. As we leave Newton entrenched in his multi-front battle for intellectual supremacy, it's clear that his later years were a whirlwind of contradictions and complexities. Here was a man who could unravel the mysteries of the cosmos, yet wrestle with the mundane intricacies of academic politics. His work was a tapestry woven from threads of scientific rigor, mystical exploration, and an unyielding desire to understand the universe in all its glorious complexity. Newton's legacy, like his life, is a blend of romance and reality. The calculus controversy, with all its pamphlet wars and posturing, was a testament to the fierce competitiveness of the academic world, a place where ideas were currency and reputations were on the line. Yet, through it all, Newton's genius shone brightly, illuminating the path of scientific discovery and leaving an indelible mark on the world. And while his alchemical experiments and biblical calculations may seem like footnotes in the grand narrative of his life, they reveal a mind that was as boundless as the universe he sought to understand. So, as we reach the end of this chapter, with Newton embroiled in feuds and forays into the mystical, one thing is certain. The story of Isaac Newton is far from over. There's still more ground to cover, more mysteries to unravel, and more insights to uncover as we continue our exploration of one of history's most enigmatic figures. Stay tuned, because the tale of Newton's genius has plenty more twists and turns left to reveal. As the final act of Isaac Newton's life unfolds, we're left with a man whose mind was as expansive as the universe he sought to dissect. Fast forward to 1705. Newton, now 62, was knighted by Queen Anne. This wasn't just a ceremonial pat on the back. It was a royal nod to a lifetime of intellectual hustle. But knighthood wasn't some golden ticket to retirement in a quaint English countryside. Nope, Newton continued to be as industrious as a caffeinated squirrel in a nut factory. He spent his twilight years at the Royal Mint, where the task of managing England's currency was about as simple as herding cats. But hey, for a guy who turned the cosmos into a mathematical playground, this was just another puzzle to crack. Newton's time at the Mint wasn't without its quirks. Picture him, a septuagenarian, trudging through the gritty streets of London, still battling counterfeiters and refining coinage like it was a high-stakes chess game. And speaking of games, Newton wasn't just a pawn in the academic battlefield. He was the grandmaster. By 1720, he had amassed a substantial fortune, testament to his financial acumen. Yet, the South Sea bubble burst that year, a financial fiasco that made even the steadiest hands tremble. Newton, despite his towering intellect, wasn't immune to the allure of speculative investments. He lost £20,000, equivalent to millions today, revealing that even the sharpest minds can be duped by the glitter of quick riches. I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people, he lamented, a sharp reminder that genius has its limits. As the years wore on, Newton's health began to falter. Gone were the days of endless calculations and alchemical explorations. Instead, he occupied himself with revising and republishing his previous works, tweaking them with the perfectionist zeal of a painter forever dissatisfied with his masterpiece. By now, his reputation as the father of modern physics was well cemented, yet his personal life remained as solitary as ever. Newton never married, and his closest companions were his books and papers, whispering secrets of the universe that he alone could decipher. In his final years, Newton became something of a recluse, retreating to his home at 35 St. Martin Street in Leicester Square. There, he lived with his niece, Catherine Barton, who provided companionship and managed his household affairs. But even in his isolation, Newton's mind never stopped its relentless quest for understanding. He continued to correspond with other scientists, engaging in debates that were often as fiery as a midsummer bonfire. His reputation as a scientific titan attracted admirers and critics alike, each eager to learn from or challenge the man who had redefined the scientific landscape. By March 1727, the curtain was beginning to fall on Newton's extraordinary life. He died in his sleep on March 31st, leaving behind a legacy as profound as the theories he had penned. His funeral was a grand affair, attended by luminaries of the day who recognized the magnitude of his contributions. Newton was buried in Westminster Abbey, among kings and poets, a fitting resting place for a man whose genius had transcended the ordinary and ventured into the realm of the extraordinary. Reflecting on Newton's legacy, it's clear that his impact on science was as transformative as it was enduring. His Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica laid the groundwork for classical mechanics, a framework that would hold sway until the advent of Einstein's relativity. Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation became the bedrock of physics, influencing everything from engineering to astronomy. His work paved the way for the Industrial Revolution, a period of unprecedented technological advancement that reshaped the world. And let's not forget calculus, that mathematical marvel born from Newton's mind, which continues to be a cornerstone of scientific inquiry. Yet, Newton's legacy isn't just about his scientific achievements. It's also about the man himself, a complex figure whose eccentricities were as legendary as his intellect. His ventures into alchemy and biblical chronology reveal a mind unafraid to wander into the unknown, seeking answers in places others dared not tread. Newton was a paradox, a blend of rigorous logic and unrestrained curiosity, a man who could calculate the cosmos, yet remain an enigma to those around him. As we sift through the myths and realities of Newton's life, it's tempting to get swept up in the romanticized tales of falling apples and serendipitous insights. But the truth is far more compelling. Newton's genius wasn't the result of a single moment of inspiration, but rather a lifetime of relentless inquiry, a testament to the power of perseverance and intellectual rigor. His story is a reminder that even the most brilliant minds are human, prone to the same follies and frailties as the rest of us. In the end, Newton's life was a tapestry of contradictions, an interplay of science and mysticism, solitude and brilliance, triumph and tragedy. His legacy is etched not just in the annals of science, but in the very fabric of our understanding of the universe. And while the apple might not have truly struck his head, the impact of his genius is undeniable, a force that continues to shape the world long after his passing. So as we close the book on Newton's remarkable journey, we're left with a profound appreciation for the man behind the myth. Isaac Newton, the solitary genius, the relentless investigator, the father of modern physics. His story is one of unyielding curiosity and indomitable spirit, a saga that reminds us of the boundless potential of the human mind. And in a world where apples still fall and stars still shine, Newton's legacy endures, a beacon of enlightenment for generations to come. The sun barely peeks over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, and you're already up. No snooze button to hit here. It's the Heian period, somewhere between 794 and 1185 AD, and you're a fisherman in ancient Japan. Your day starts early, because fish don't exactly wait for you to get your beauty sleep. The air is crisp, and the village is still quiet, save for the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird you've yet to identify. Because let's be honest, you're here for the fish, not an ornithology lesson. Your first task, gear up. Now, don't expect anything high-tech. Forget fiberglass rods and nylon lines. It's all about bamboo rods and silk lines today. The bamboo rod, a trusty companion, is lightweight yet sturdy, perfect for casting out into the serene waters. The silk line, spun from the fine threads of silkworms, is strong enough to reel in the catch, but delicate enough that you've got to handle it with care. It's a delicate dance, a balance between man and nature, like a fisherman's version of a tea ceremony. But before we dive into the water, let's talk economics. Fishing in ancient Japan isn't just a pastime, it's a lifeline. During the Heian period, the fishing industry is a cornerstone of the economy, as stable as a rock in a sea of political and social turbulence. Fish isn't just food, it's currency. It's how you keep the rice bowls filled, how you pay taxes, and how the village survives. It's not just about catching dinner, it's about fueling an entire community. Imagine the pressure. But hey, no one said being a fisherman was all sunrises and sea breezes. Speaking of community, let's bust a myth or two. Ever heard the one about the lone fisherman, the stoic figure against the backdrop of crashing waves? Romantic, sure, but laughably inaccurate. Fishing in this era is a communal effort. You and your village might be heading out in a flotilla of small boats, with everyone playing a critical role. Someone's got to navigate, someone has to haul the nets, and someone's there to make sure nothing valuable goes overboard. It's more a team sport than a solo adventure, with camaraderie as essential as any fishing net. And these fishing villages, they're like a tightly woven net themselves. Everyone knows everyone and their business. You can bet that if you catch a particularly impressive fish, the entire village will hear about it before you've even docked. But the flip side is, if you're having a rough day, you've got a community ready to rally around you. So much for the lonely fisherman myth. There's something inherently democratic about it all. Sure, there are hierarchies, there always are. But when it comes to the sea, everyone's in it together. The ocean doesn't care if you're the village head or the new kid on the block. It's a great equalizer, demanding respect and cooperation from all who dare to draw from its depths. And let's not forget the nitty-gritty of the economics here. Fish isn't just for feasting, it's a trade commodity. The bustling markets of Heian Kaiyo, today's Kyoto, thrive on the constant influx of fish from villages like yours. Fish oils and salted fish are hot commodities, traded far and wide, and even the most mundane fish can become a prized possession when dried and preserved. Prices fluctuate based on the season and the catch, but a good haul can mean the difference between feast and famine. So as you finish preparing your gear, take a moment to appreciate the ritual of it all. Tying knots, checking the lines, feeling the weight of the bamboo in your hand. These are the routines that connect you to generations past. And though the tools may have changed over the centuries, the essence of fishing remains timeless. Man against nature, community over isolation, sustenance over luxury. As the sun rises higher, casting golden light on the water, you're ready to head out. It's a new day, with new possibilities, and as you push off from the shore, you feel the quiet thrill of the unknown. Will today be the day of a great catch, or just another ordinary day on the water? Either way, you're part of a tradition as old as the tides themselves, and there's something deeply satisfying about that. As your boat drifts from the shore, the familiar sound of water lapping against the hull is both soothing and anticipatory. Today, you're not just any fisherman, you're practically a conductor in a symphony of the sea, orchestrating an ancient technique that might surprise those who think fishing is solely about nets and rods. Enter the cormorant, your feathered fishing assistant, known for turning fish catching into an art form. Cormorant fishing, or yukai, is the epitome of avian aquatic teamwork. These sleek black birds, with their long necks and sharp eyes, are trained to dive and snatch fish from the depths faster than you can say, sashimi. But don't be fooled by the seemingly glamorous portrayal of this technique. The truth is, it's less about a leisurely bird-watching experience, and more about a complex, highly skilled dance between man and nature. Picture this. You, standing at the bow, with a dozen cormorants tethered by leashes, expertly guiding them with subtle tweaks and calls. Let's break it down. Cormorants have been used in Japan since around 960 AD, and their fishing prowess is legendary. These birds can dive up to 20 meters and hold their breath for over a minute. That's Olympic-level performance, folks. However, before you start imagining a leisurely day on the water with your avian companions, consider the reality. cormorant fishing is a nighttime affair. You're balancing on a swaying boat, illuminated by roaring fires in iron baskets, attracting fish to the surface. Romantic? Maybe. Exhausting? Absolutely. And let's talk about those birds. They don't catch fish out of the goodness of their hearts. Each bird has a snare tied loosely around its throat, preventing it from swallowing the larger fish it catches. Sounds rough, but rest assured, they're rewarded with smaller fish for their efforts. A fair trade, if not exactly fairy-tale-like. On the boat, there's no room for slackers. Your role might be guiding the cormorants, but there are others with equally critical tasks. The experienced captain, or usher, is the maestro of this floating orchestra, ensuring everything runs smoothly. He's not just steering, he's the embodiment of sea wisdom, with stories etched into his weathered skin. Then there's the koshi, the net handler, always ready to haul in the catch. Each role is crucial, and hierarchy on board is respected, but when a storm rolls in, it's all hands on deck, and titles mean little against the wrath of nature. Speaking of storms, let's address another myth, the rugged, carefree life of a seafarer. Sure, it sounds poetic, until you're out on the open water, where the sea can switch from placid to perilous faster than you can say, typhoon. Ancient Japanese fishermen were at the mercy of unpredictable weather, with no GPS or radar to guide them, just an intimate knowledge of the sea and the sky. Each voyage was a gamble, with the stakes as high as the waves. A good day meant a bountiful catch. A bad day could mean disaster. Weather wasn't the only challenge. Long hours were the norm, not the exception. You'd be out before sunrise and return well after dark, with the weight of your catch determining whether you'd have a triumphant return or a sullen one. The physical toll was immense. Think about it, hauling nets, managing birds, and battling the elements, all while maintaining balance on a rocking boat. It's enough to make even the most dedicated gym-goer break a sweat. And let's not forget the economics at play. Fishing, remember, wasn't just about filling bellies, it was a business. The village relied on these expeditions for sustenance and trade. Fish were bartered for rice or cloth, the latter being a luxury in this era. The stakes were high, and every fish mattered. It wasn't just a question of livelihood, it was about survival. So, while it's easy to romanticize the image of the lone fisherman under the stars, the reality was far grittier. These men were not just adventurers. They were essential cogs in the wheel of their community's economy. Without them, the local economy would flounder like a beached tuna. And while the ocean offered sustenance, it demanded respect and sometimes sacrifice in return. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and violet, you realize that this life, though tough, is one of profound connection to the sea, to your community, and to the centuries of fishermen who have come before you. It's a legacy of endurance, skill, and unyielding respect for the unpredictable forces of nature. And as you guide your cormorants home, their silhouettes gracefully cutting through the twilight, you know that tomorrow the cycle will begin anew. The sea will still be there, vast and mysterious, ready to challenge and provide in equal measure. As the cormorants settle into their roosts and you dock your boat, you prepare to dive into the next act of this ancient aquatic opera, the fish market. It's not just a place to offload your catch, it's the buzzing heart of the village economy, a theater where barter and exchange play out daily. Think of it as the Heian period's Wall Street, but with more seaweed and less insider trading. The fish market is alive with activity, a cacophony of haggling voices, and the unmistakable aroma of the sea. Here, fish isn't just food, it's currency, social lubricant, and political tool rolled into one. As you haul your catch to your usual spot, you're not just a fisherman, you're a trader, an economist, and occasionally a diplomat. Let's break it down. In this market, money as we know it takes a backseat. Instead, it's all about the barter system. You might swap a particularly juicy tuna for a sack of rice or a bolt of silk. The value isn't fixed, it's fluid, dancing with the rhythms of supply and demand. A bountiful catch could mean a generous trade, or it could flood the market, driving down prices faster than you can say sushi. But the market isn't just about fish and rice. It's a political arena, too. The local governance keeps a close eye on proceedings, as fishing directly impacts trade policies and taxation. During the Heian period, the local lords, or daimyo, relied heavily on the fishing industry to bolster their coffers. Fish taxes were a thing. Imagine your prized catch partially whisked away to line the pockets of the local ruling class. It's a slice of life that underscores the delicate balance of power and sustenance. One primary source, An account from a high-end noble notes the significance of the fish market in local governance. The lords of the land, their fortunes tied to the ebb and flow of the sea, doth decree that the fisher's yield shall fill the treasury as much as the belly. Not exactly Shakespeare, but it gets the point across. And let's not forget the market's role as a social hub. It's where news is exchanged alongside fish, where alliances are forged and rivalries simmer. The market is a microcosm of the broader world, where every transaction tells a story. Perhaps your neighbor, who caught a particularly rare eel, is now the toast of the village, while the fisherman who came up empty-handed must navigate the murky waters of social standing. This bustling fish economy also highlights the broader economic landscape of ancient Japan. The fishing industry wasn't just about local survival. It played a critical role in regional trade. Salted fish and fish oils were hot commodities, traded with distant villages and even across the sea to Korea and China. This trading network was the ancient equivalent of the Silk Road, if the Silk Road had a penchant for seafood. Within this economic tapestry, fishing shaped the very essence of local governance and trade policies. The daimyo, keenly aware of fishing's importance, often set regulations to protect fish stocks or control market prices, ensuring stability in their fiefdoms. Such policies could be both a blessing and a curse. While they maintained order, they also stifled innovation and competition. It's a classic case of power dynamics at play, where the sea's bounty became both a source of wealth and a tool of control. Let's not romanticize it too much, though. The market had its darker sides. Corruption wasn't unheard of, with market overseers sometimes skimming off the top or demanding bribes for the best spots. And if you think modern taxes are bad, imagine paying your dues in fish, with no guarantee of a fair assessment. Yet, despite these challenges, the market thrived, a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. But amid the hustle and bustle, there's an undeniable sense of camaraderie. Yes, competition is fierce, but there's also mutual respect. After all, everyone knows the sea can be as fickle as a high-end cordia. Today, you're flush with fish. Tomorrow, you might be the one borrowing rice. It's a delicate dance of interdependence, where every trader knows that their fortunes are tied to the collective success of the market. The political impact of fishing on local governance can't be overstated. The daimyo's policies were often influenced by the ebb and flow of the market, with fish catches dictating taxation levels and trade agreements. A good fishing season could mean lower taxes and more favorable trade terms, while a poor haul might tighten the daimyo's grip on the market, enforcing stricter controls to safeguard their income. So, while the market might seem like a simple exchange of goods, it's a microcosm of the broader socio-political landscape. The fish you sell today isn't just dinner for a family. It's a piece of the intricate puzzle that keeps the village and the region afloat. It's a reminder that, in this world, everything is interconnected, and the humble fisherman plays a role far larger than their nets might suggest. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting long shadows over the market stalls, you feel a sense of satisfaction. You've not only contributed to the village's sustenance, but also engaged in the timeless dance of trade and politics. The market's hustle may be relentless, but it's also invigorating, a testament to the enduring spirit of the community. As the market winds down and the chatter of haggling fades into the afternoon breeze, you're left to reflect on the day's events. The fish market, with all its noise and chaos, is more than just a place of commerce. It's a living testament to the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit. Here, history isn't just something that's happened. It's something that's happening, shaped by every transaction, every conversation, and every fish that's traded. You pack up your remaining wares and head home, knowing that tomorrow the market will open its doors once again. The cycle continues, as it has for generations, with each new day bringing fresh opportunities and challenges. And while the world may change, the essence of this market, the heart of the community, remains a constant, pulsing with life and possibility. In this world, the fisherman is more than just a provider. They're a linchpin holding together the fragile tapestry of commerce, politics, and community. And as you walk through the village, the weight of your empty basket replaced with the satisfaction of a day's work well done. You know that you're part of something much larger, a legacy of endurance, skill, and unyielding respect for the forces that shape our world. As you walk through the village with the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the thatched roofs, The rhythmic clatter of daily tasks fills the air. It's time for that other essential chapter of the fisherman's day, the preservation of the catch. This isn't just about keeping food edible. It's about ensuring survival when the sea decides it's in a stingy mood. Welcome to the world of drying and salting. The ancient Japanese take on refrigeration, sans electricity. First up, drying. This method is as old as time, and for good reason. It's simple. Remove moisture, and you remove the breeding ground for bacteria. In ancient Japan, this was done with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, or as close as you could get without actual machines. Fish were cleaned and then hung on wooden racks, exposed to the salty sea breeze and sun. The result? A lightweight, shelf-stable product that could be stored for leaner times, making those long winters a little less bleak. Now, if you think drying fish sounds as exciting as watching paint dry, remember, this was a cornerstone of food security. It was the ancient equivalent of a savings account, a hedge against the unpredictability of nature. So, while modern eyes might see a line of drying fish as a quaint slice of history, back then, it was a survival strategy worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize in grocery management. Next, let's dive into the saltier side of preservation. Salting fish is a bit like giving it an oceanic spa treatment, except instead of relaxation, the goal is indefinite edibility. Fish was gutted, cleaned, and then layered with salt in large barrels. The salt drew out moisture and acted as a preservative, ensuring that the fish could last for months or even years. Salted fish was a staple in both daily meals and trade, its longevity making it a valuable commodity. And let's not forget the economics of salt itself. In the Heian period, salt wasn't just a kitchen staple. It was a hot commodity, often worth its weight in, well, fish. Salt had to be harvested from the sea or traded for, making it a valuable resource that even the daimyo kept a close eye on. It was the white gold of its time, and controlling salt production meant wielding significant power. So there you have it. Salt wasn't just seasoning, it was a cornerstone of economic might. These preservation techniques didn't just keep bellies full, they also shaped the culinary landscape of the region. Imagine the intense flavors of dried or salted fish, rich in umami, the taste sensation that makes your taste buds do a little happy dance. These methods paved the way for regional dishes that are still popular today. Dried fish could be rehydrated in soups, while salted fish might be steamed or grilled, becoming central to meals that nourished both body and spirit. Now, let's address a common misconception. The idea that sushi, as we know it, was a staple of this period. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. While the Heian period did see the practice of fermenting fish with rice, it was a far cry from the delicate, vinegared rice creations we associate with sushi today. In fact, the fermentation process was more about preservation than gastronomy, and the rice was often discarded. That's right. What's now a delicacy was once just a way to keep fish edible. Talk about a culinary glow-up. The myth of ancient sushi is appealing, sure. Who wouldn't want to imagine Heian nobles delicately nibbling on nigiri while discussing poetry? But the reality is grittier and far more rooted in necessity. Fish preservation was about survival, not style, and the techniques used were pragmatic responses to the challenges of the time. The political and social implications of these preservation practices were no small fish, either. With fish being a key trade item, the ability to preserve it meant that villages could engage in long-distance trade, reaching as far as Korea and China. This wasn't just about economic gain. It was a way to forge alliances and create networks that extended far beyond the shores of Japan. A well-preserved fish was a passport to a broader world, a tangible connection to distant markets and cultures. In this context, fish preservation emerges as a quiet but potent force in shaping regional politics and economies. It was an equalizer, a way for even the smallest fishing villages to play a part in the larger tapestry of trade and diplomacy. So, while the image of drying racks and salt barrels might seem mundane, they were in truth the silent engines driving prosperity and connectivity across ancient Japan. The act of preserving fish also reinforced communal bonds. It was a labor-intensive process, requiring coordination and cooperation, much like the fishing itself. Families worked together, sharing techniques and passing down knowledge through generations. This wasn't just a means to an end, it was a tradition, a cultural touchstone that united communities in their shared reliance on the sea. As the village buzzes with the activity of preservation, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity of it all. The methods may be simple, but they underscore a profound truth. In the face of nature's unpredictability, humans have always found ways to adapt and thrive. It's a testament to the resilience and resourcefulness of those who live by the sea, their lives intertwined with the rhythms of the ocean and the cycles of the seasons. So, the next time you enjoy a piece of fish, whether dried, salted, or in a modern sushi roll, take a moment to appreciate the history behind it. Remember the fishermen of ancient Japan, who turned preservation into an art form and laid the groundwork for culinary traditions that continue to delight our palates today. It's a legacy of flavor and survival, a reminder that sometimes the most enduring innovations are born out of necessity. As the afternoon sun begins to dip, casting long shadows across the village, you find yourself reflecting on the interconnectedness of it all. The fishermen, the market, the preservation techniques, they're all threads in a larger tapestry, each playing a vital role in the story of ancient Japan. It's a story of survival and ingenuity, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who lived by the sea. And as you prepare for the evening's activities, you know that the cycle will continue, as it has for generations. The sea will provide, the community will adapt, and the legacy of those who came before will live on in every salted fish, every trade, and every meal shared. It's a dance as old as time, and one that shows no signs of ending anytime soon. As the evening settles in, with the sky painted in deep indigo hues and the first stars twinkling like distant lanterns, the village transforms. The day's labors give way to a different kind of rhythm, one of community and connection. This is when the fishermen, now unburdened by the day's catch and toil, gather around communal fires. It's a scene that might sound like a postcard from the past, but don't let the warm glow fool you. Beneath the surface lies a complex web of traditions and social rituals that kept these communities afloat. In the heart of this evening, ritual is storytelling, an ancient art form that was as much a part of the fishing life as the nets and boats. Stories were shared, passed down like heirlooms, each one polished with the patina of countless retellings. They weren't just about entertainment. They were instructional, a verbal roadmap through the challenges of life on the sea. You see, in a world where literacy was a luxury and books were rarer than a bluefin tuna, stories were the primary currency of knowledge and culture. The tales ranged from heroic epics to cautionary fables, each carrying its own weight of wisdom. One popular story told of Urashima Taro, a fisherman who saved a turtle and was taken to an undersea palace, only to find upon his return that centuries had passed. It's a tale with layers, like a psychological onion, questions about time, mortality, and the nature of reality itself. And while it paints fishing as a mystical, almost otherworldly pursuit, the underlying message was clear. The sea is a place of wonder, but also of danger and unpredictability. These stories romanticize the fishing life, turning the mundane into the mythical. Who wouldn't want to believe in a world where fishermen are heroes and the ocean holds magical kingdoms? But let's not get too swept away. The reality was often far more brutal. The sea could be as unforgiving as a tax collector with a grudge, and those who worked its waters knew this all too well. Yet, these tales served a purpose, offering an emotional escape and a shared cultural identity that bound the community together. Now, let's talk about the social fabric of these villages, which was tighter than a fisherman's knot. Evening gatherings weren't just about swapping stories. They were about reinforcing social bonds and communal hierarchies. Sitting by the fire, you'd find the village elders, respected figures whose advice was as valued as a good harvest. Their stories carried an air of authority, shaping community values and guiding decisions. These gatherings were the social glue that held the village together, fostering a sense of belonging that went beyond mere survival. And of course, no evening would be complete without food. Here, the day's catch took on a new life, transformed into communal feasts. Grilled fish, seasoned with the simplest of ingredients, became a symbol of shared labor and mutual reliance. It wasn't just about filling bellies. It was about celebrating the fruits of their collective efforts. The food might have been humble, but the sense of camaraderie was anything but. As the night deepened, the conversations would often turn to more serious matters, like the political and economic realities that influenced everyday life. The daimyo's tax policies, trade agreements with neighboring villages, and the ever-present threat of piracy were all fair game for discussion. These were not naive, insular communities. They were keenly aware of the broader forces shaping their world. In many ways, these gatherings were a grassroots form of governance, where decisions were debated and alliances forged over the crackle of the fire. This brings us to the myths and realities of ancient Japanese fishing, which, like any good story, are layered with both truth and exaggeration. It's tempting to romanticize the life of a fisherman as one of serene sunrises and bountiful catches. But the truth is as complex as the sea itself. Fishing was a grueling, high-stakes endeavor, fraught with physical danger and economic uncertainty. Yet, it was also a life rich in tradition and community, where every day offered a chance to connect with both nature and one's fellow villagers. The narratives that emerged from this life have shaped modern perceptions of ancient Japanese fishing, often emphasizing the romantic over the realistic. Thanks to these stories, we've come to view the fisherman as a noble figure, a guardian of age-old traditions. But let's not forget the sweat and toil behind the legend. These were real people, facing real challenges, whose lives were governed by the relentless cycles of nature. In reflecting on this legacy, we're reminded of the resilience and adaptability of those who lived by the sea. They were masters of their environment, not through domination, but through understanding and respect. Their stories, though romanticized, offer us valuable insights into the human spirit, our capacity to find meaning and connection in the face of adversity. So, as you sit back and let these tales of ancient fishermen swirl in your mind, remember that history is more than just a collection of facts and dates. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of human experience, each story adding depth and texture to our understanding of the past. And while the myths may shine brighter than the reality, it's the interplay between the two that truly illuminates the essence of life on the sea. As the fires burn low and the village drifts into the quiet hum of night, the fishermen prepare to do it all again. Because that's the thing about tradition. It endures, evolving with each new generation, yet always rooted in the same fundamental truths. The sea remains, vast and mysterious, ready to challenge and provide in equal measure. And so, the cycle continues, as it has for centuries, a dance as old as time itself.